Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for August 20th, 2018. We'll begin with the Build It Back cases. Item number 1, 2018-130BZ, 22 Stanton Road, Brooklyn. Do you want to call them all three? Item number 2, 2018-131BZ, 32 Stanton Road, Brooklyn. And item number 3, 2018-134BZ, 24A Mesereau Court, Brooklyn.
Good morning. I will be making a brief presentation about these three Build-It-Back applications.
And your name for the record?
My name is Jella Prenga, Project Manager at BSA. So the three properties are located within Sheepshead Bay Courts, Brooklyn. Last year, on May 24th, 2017, there were 34 homes that were approved for 6492 special permits within the Sheepshead Bay Courts. This is an aerial view, and the three homes that are subject to the application today are highlighted in red. You can also see them here: 24A Mesereau Court, 22 Stanton Court, and 32 Stanton Court. These are located in an R41 zoning district in Community Board 15 in Brooklyn. The location is south of the Belt Parkway. As you can see, the homes are fronting on courts, which are paths that provide ingress and egress to the homes, but are not considered to be 1210 zoning streets. Therefore, they require waivers at BSA. The reason why these the homes along the courts are not considered streets are because the courts are located within easements along the properties. However, the majority of the width of these easements, which varies but is around 16 feet wide, typically, are obstructed, and therefore about 4 feet walkable path is accessible to the owners to walk down. And because of the obstructions such as front yards, walls, fences, gates, etc., these courts are not considered streets. So these are just some photos to show you the situation and the pathways that lead to these homes. And you can see here from the land use map that the predominant land use is single-family homes. Additionally, the courts are 4 feet below grade. These were the homes that were approved last year as part of the Build It Back application before BSA in 2017. These are some more photos of the homes. Just as an aside, most of the homes are shallow. They're less than 95 feet in length, and they are undersized for lot area, contrary to ZR Section 2332. Summary, the Sheepshead Bay Courts, the applications are utilizing Appendix A of Article 6, Chapter 4, Special Regulations for Neighborhood Recovery Areas. So Appendix A modifies some of the zoning regulations for the bulk, but many of them tie back to the underlying zoning, the R41 zoning district. So we went over this a little bit, but basically the courts do not meet the zoning definition of streets. So they are unable to provide yards, and I'll explain that in a second. So the zoning definition of yards is tied to the street line, and the lot lines are tied to the street. The definition of lot lines are tied to the street line. So because of this, since these homes do not have a street line, they do not therefore have a front lot line, and therefore they can't meet their front yard rear yard or side yard requirements, because in essence, they don't really have front yards, side yards, or rear yards. So,
Even though they have space between them.
yes,
It's
they
not-
have open areas.
Right.
They have open areas surrounding the properties, the homes, and I'll explain that in a moment, but those open areas are not considered yards as per the zoning definition. So because of them not having officially #yard, BSA, there's an application to waive the yard requirements for the front, side, and rear yards. So the sections of this yard that we're waiving are, for the front yard is 23, 45, and 64A 351, the minimum required front yard of 10 feet. And then the minimum required width of the side yard, the minimum rear yard requirement of 23, 47, and 64A 53, which can be reduced to 10 feet for the shallow yard, for the shallow lots. And then now the open space and lot coverage actually is waived by Article 6, Chapter 4, because all three zoning lots are under 1,800 square feet, and that's pursuant to Section 64A 313, which is not listed up there.
So we're not being asked to waive the open space or
Open space for lot coverage.
lot coverage?
Yeah.
Okay.
So these are two of the homes that are currently existing and subject to this application. 22 Stanton Road, 32 Stanton Road. This is 24A Mesro Court, the third home that's part of the application. So 22 Stanton Court, this was actually approved as part of the 34 home application in May of 2017. However, that home, they need to surrender their special permit because this home was proposed to be elevated. So the 22 Stanton Road, the home to the left, was proposed to be elevated, and that's what the approval at BSA last year was for. However, due to the condition of the home and the cost to elevate and the time they Build It Back determined it's better to reconstruct the home. And that's the same situation for 32 Stanton Road. So, and actually, 24A Mesero Court was not part of the BSA application last year, but this will also be reconstructed. So all three homes will be demolished and reconstructed. So for 22 Stanton Road, it's currently a one-story home, and it's proposed to be a three-story, 944 square foot home, which is under the .75 maximum FAR for the R41 zoning district, which it's your .68 FAR proposed. The lot is undersized, as I said. So the open area measurements that are proposed are the measurement on the north side, because there are no side yards or front yards or rear yards. These are just measurements of open areas around the home. The measurement on the north side is 4.5 feet. The measurement on the east side is 13 feet. The measurement on the west side is 10 feet, and the open area measurement on the south side is 4.5 feet. I understand that it's a little difficult to see it on the plot plan on the side, but that is what's represented there.
But
And-
so east and west are the top and the bottom
Yeah.
of the, okay, so those are the front and rear yards?
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
can see that they're bigger, but they have obstructions in them. Now, we have them, the permitted obstructions listed on the plot plan that is as part of the BSA application, but not shown here. So for 22 Stanton Road, the proposed obstructions are an exterior stair at the east side of the property, an exterior stair at the west side of the property, and you can see that on the plot plan, and then a wheelchair lift at the east side of the property.
But in fact, they're not obstructions because these aren't yards.
Right.
Unless there's an obstruction of open space, but you don't have one because it's waived, or unless it's increasing the degree of noncompliance, is it? So I just want to make sure that what we waive is everything that needs to be waived.
So
Right,
there
so-
are permitted obstructions in open space, which is pursuant to 2312 and ties back to section 2344. This issue actually came up in the last application from last year after approval. The DOB asked BSA if this was intended to be waived, and it is intended to be waived, the obstruction.
The permitted obstruction in open space.
Open space.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
so we also need to do that, okay.
And the height is compliant and is measured from the flood-resistant construction elevation, which is 13 feet. And this is a elevation of the proposal. Then there's 32 Stanton Road. This is developed, these two properties are directly across from each other and are the same exact lot area and lot measurements. So it's going to be virtually almost the same home except flipped. So the open areas are almost the same, except on the east side it's 10 feet and on the west side it's 13 feet. And the obstructions are actually the same as the other property.
Okay, so in this case, and the last one, it's a waiver of front, rear, side yards, and permitted obstructions in open space?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, 24A Mesra Court is located on a different block, as you saw on the aerial. This is an irregularly shaped lot. As you can see the lot lines somewhat. I know it's hard to see it, but it's still undersized for the zoning district. It's 2,345 square foot lot. It's 55 feet in length and varies in width from 46 to 38 feet. So the open area measurements are a little larger than the other lots because this is a slightly larger lot. So the open area measurement on the north side is 18 feet 11 inches. The open area measurement on the east side is 10, and on the west side is also 10 feet. And then the open area measurement on the south side is 5 feet. The height is compliant, 24 feet 5 inches from FRCE. You may remember that Article 6, Chapter 4 does modify the height regulations for these properties, and the maximum height permitted is 25 feet, although in the underlying zoning district, maximum height is 35 feet. The FAR is compliant, it's 0.38. And this is the elevation.
So wait, before you do that, that also has a staircase in the side yard?
There are also permitted obstructions in the open areas. However, they are different from the other properties, slightly different. There is no wheelchair lift for this property.
But they are seeking waiver of the permitted obstruction.
Do they need it though? Because since they don't have a required yard, so they're getting yard waivers, right?
Yes.
In the other case, all of the open area basically is obstructed by something. In this case, there's a large open area to the side.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if they're already meeting their open area requirement and they don't need a waiver of open area
There is no
obstruction.
open area, there's no open space requirement for these properties or lot coverage.
I thought if they were simply lifting the existing house, there wouldn't be because it's a pre-existing condition. So that's what I'm trying to understand. Why is there a permitted a waiver of the permitted obstruction in an open area if you don't have open space, if you don't have an open space requirement? I think you must, right? Yeah, why so? If there's no requirement for if we're waiving all the yards.
We are waiving all the yards.
Then you don't need to waive permitted obstructions because there aren't any, because there's no yards, right?
We're including the obstructions in the open areas because DOB asked us to.
Oh,
so
we're
that-
just doing it, okay.
Yeah, because they
Belt and suspenders.
although these homes would be impossible to access without stickers.
Right.
True.
No, but the reason I was asking is if you have a, let's say, 50% lot coverage maximum, this isn't covering 50% of its lot probably or something.
No, the
right?
lot coverage is around 37%.
Right, so therefore, it's meeting its open space requirements, assuming it had one.
have it.
Right, so it's kind of like you're waiving this, but there isn't anything to waive.
No, right, that was the rationale why we didn't do it last time.
Right.
But then DOB came back and said, we need like some sort of explicit thing
Okay.
from you aside from the plans and the resolution. And so we just said, like, fine, we're waiving.
So the obstructions here are slightly different. There's 2 exterior stairs at the north and east side, and then the roof, they listed the roof overhang at the east side. And that's in summary, the 3 properties.
Thank you very much. Well done.
Also, I believe they're asking for a waiver of the board's rules and procedures. Yes.
They are also requesting a waiver of the board's rules and practice and procedure.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Trina.
Great, Jill.
Okay. Ready, Tony?
Laptop.
Tony?
Tony, next.
Oh, I thought she was going to bring a laptop, okay. Item number 4, 2017-251A, Brooklyn Queens Expressway at 31st Street, Queens. Do I call them separately?
No, together, right?
And item number 5, 2017-252A, Brooklyn Queens Expressway at 32nd Avenue, Queens.
Okay. We were provided with proof of service of the initial application to DOB, city planning, and the affected owner, and a proof of notice of hearing to DOB and the affected owner. So, as far as I can tell, the appellant has made a very weak case to start with by assuming that the commissioners reviewing this case already know the details of the case. Only one of our current commissioners was on the board at the time of the 2012 decision, and let's just say has looked at a few other cases since then. So, but if I pieced this together rather bumpily with no help whatsoever from the appellant and with DOB's clear papers, this sign and the next application, the other sign that's back-to-back with this, located on block 1137, lot 22, were the subject of a BSA decision in 2012 under calendar number 119-12-A and 120-12-A, denying the appeal by CBS Outdoor for 12 signs located on CSX-owned properties, holding that the signs on CSX properties are subject to zoning. These cases were appealed in an Article 78, where the Supreme Court upheld the BSA determination, but remanded the CSX cases, because there were other cases for Amtrak and Metro and MTA, but remanded the CSX cases to DOB for DOB's determination as to whether the signs might be retained because they were legal nonconforming. One argument that the appellant is making is relative to the applicability of New York City Charter Section 643. I'm not convinced that DOB doesn't have the authority over signs located on bridges in the first place. Section 643-4 states that it has jurisdictions as to signs attached to the exterior of, quote, any building or structure. That's DOB has authority. And the exception, number 7, that the appellant refers to, appears to be directed to inspection and testing of electrical wires, et cetera, and may actually only be relevant to bridges associated with waterfront properties, depending on how you read it. And in addition to which, the exact argument, but not very carefully done, was made in the 2012 BSA case that was appealed to the Supreme Court, although the court didn't specifically discuss this section in its decision. But in any event, I think it's issue precluded because it was raised to the court before. So I don't understand how that's being brought up again. But now the appellant is arguing that, unlike what it represented to the BSA in 2012 and to the court in 2014 and 15, the subject sign sits on Amtrak property and not on CSX property. Appellant provides no proofs that the site is Amtrak property, and ACRIS, Department of Finance website, shows that until 2004, the property was owned by Conrail/CSX and transferred in 2005 to NYC.Inc., New York Central Line, which is based in Jacksonville, Florida, and registered as a corporation in Delaware. According to the Department of Buildings, New York City Central Line is a subsidiary of CSX. BSA, as far as I know, doesn't have independent information on that, so I would like DOB to explain a little better where they got that from. They gave us some links, but I couldn't follow how the links got them to conclude it's CSX subsidiary, but certainly it's not Amtrak. And I'm really actually quite concerned about this testimony by the appellant, claiming that it's Amtrak property when they provided zero proof on that. Whether or not it's Amtrak property is a question of fact, which is easily determined by deeds, leases, corporate histories, and so on. And I really feel that this was a willful misrepresentation, which before government agencies, 2 of them, and that is not permitted, and in fact is punishable offense. So this gives me real concern that we're dealing with something that's not actually proper here. Other comments? I know Commissioner Otley Brown was the sole commissioner who was on this case. Maybe she wants to give us some more information.
Yeah. Just as to the cases before, the properties that were on CSX land were part of CSX Railroad were not deemed to be qualifying for the federal preemption.
Right.
So I find it really interesting now that they're going back and saying that, well, the Amtrak case found that, they met those findings, and so therefore we're actually on Amtrak land. I did the ACRIS search, as did you, and I saw the same thing, the New York Central Lines LLC, and I believe there's something in that document, and I was going to try and pull it up, that ties it to CSX directly in the document. And there is nothing, if you look at the history of deeds, that says anything about Amtrak, even in the past or present. So I was kind of puzzled about that. And I also was puzzled about their assertion that this was on Amtrak land simply because the DOB property profile overview cites to a cross street that said it's an Amtrak's connecting railroad link or something like that. But this is a block and lot that is not in the cross street. And so I didn't know how they got from cross street to ownership of this block and lot. So I thought there were plenty of holes in their argument. And also, as to the legal non-conforming use, I think by now just about everybody in the appellant community regarding billboard signs of all types knows that you need to provide evidence that proves that for every single year the sign was in existence from the threshold year on through. And while we did get photos, none of those photos were dated, so we have no way to determine when they were actually taken. So I didn't find the appellant's arguments convincing in the least bit.
Right. I just want to just add to this point that the idea that an Amtrak train travels over a train track doesn't make it Amtrak property. Amtrak has right-of-ways over lots of other people's properties, and if DOB is associating in their description on the cross street that rail with Amtrak, it's really, from my view, just a convenience of expression. We all know that Amtrak trains travel on this. Metro North trains also travel on this, right? So that doesn't mean that it's Metro North-owned property either. So, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, so go ahead.
No, as I was reviewing it, I was trying to understand the history of it, and what I find fascinating is that, here an opportunity was given after filing Article 78 to kind of legitimize these signs. and the appellant chose not to find that simple route, but tried to go back to an ownership issue when the BSA application resolution clearly states, I went to the BSA resolution to see what was the ownership that was stated, and it said CSX, and all of a sudden it has changed. And like you both have said, there is no document, and I looked at ACRES, and ACRES still refers to nothing with Amtrak, so I'm curious where that connection is being made. It cannot be through like right-of-ways and other things. It has to be pure ownership. And to use that New York City Charter chapter, section 643.7, when I read it, I see it more as like items that are associated with systems of exclusively for the rail lines, for the tunnels and for the subways, which is beyond DOB's ability, like with signal repairs or with timing and automatic sensor and all of that. But this is an independent sign structure that is standing on a very standalone pole, which is not physically or any way connected to the viaduct that is carrying train. And so I think it's a very weak and not a way to look at it. Our focus should be just ownership. If the ownership was Amtrak, then we have a different way to look at it. Otherwise, we're just looking at the simple way to look at it, proof of legality. And so far, every document that has been provided only dates as far as back as 80. So you really cannot even qualify this sign as a legally non-conforming sign, and a lot of the lease terms are from 1980. So I think it fails that also, even if, let's say, we didn't accept the Amtrak.
Commissioner Shea.
Yeah, I'm not sure if being located on Amtrak property, that would make the sign exempt. My thinking is, let's say Amtrak has a piece
That
of,
was a case that was
Yeah,
actually
this-
decided already.
Yeah, so the BSA determined, and the court didn't need to deal with it because the BSA determined back in that 2012 case, that there was federal preemption applied to Amtrak property because there's a section in the Amtrak legislation that specifically states that Amtrak property is not subject to local zoning regulation and building codes, actually,
if-
any local regulation.
And that Amtrak can do whatever it needs to do to self-fund.
Oh, and self-fund, right.
Including renting out
Right.
Yes,
signs.
right,
so
yeah,
if
sorry.
Amtrak has a piece of property, they can build whatever on it
Well, we don't want to
without-
have a big,
without going to the.
right, we don't want to have a big discussion about Amtrak property because it was a decision that the board made previously. But, I mean, if this had been Amtrak property, then we'd have a discussion about it
Okay.
again, right?
Okay.
But so far, we haven't established in any stretch that this is Amtrak property. If they could establish it, then we'd go back to what we learned in the 2012 case and review that material and then ask the similar questions. But the questions that were raised by the court in determining whether CSX and whether MTA had preemption had to do with the language in the statutes that gave them the authority to operate their rail lines, and whether or not the statute either said directly or implied that advertising for the purpose of creating revenue was permitted under the statute, right? Was somehow directly connected to the operation of rail use.
But,
Sorry.
but also, if I could, I believe this was only on remand to discuss whether or not these were legal non-conforming
correct.
uses. And so to the extent that the appellant wants to undermine kind of factual bases of the board's prior decision, that's not really before you.
Yeah,
What's
correct.
before, and I appreciate, though, you speaking about this additional information that's been provided, and the lack of evidence for that. But I think that you should maybe focus on whether they provided enough proof that the sign was established legally and that it was continued legally
Right,
under
right.
the zoning resolution.
But I just have to say, the reason we're talking about it is because now they claim they're
Oh, I know.
Amtrak
I-
property,
yes. Yeah.
which would then put it under a decision in 2012, which would arguably exempt them.
Right.
I understand.
And then the other is because they raise again the argument that they're exempt under 643.7,
No, I know. Yeah.
which I don't remember whether the board talked about 643.7 back in 2012. But the court never talked about it, right? And so we're just reiterating an argument that they're making, an old argument that they're reiterating as well. And then the question of providing us with no proofs, and DOB with no proofs of their pre-existing non-conforming condition. So sorry to interrupt you, but we're not going to talk about whether or not Amtrak is exempt. We're just talking about what they proved and your interpretation of what they.
Unless they come back with a proof that is located on Amtrak.
Correct,
property. Okay,
correct.
I'm okay with that, thank you.
Okay. All right.
Move on. Item number 6, 268-14BZ, 231-0610 Northern Boulevard, Queens.
So with this one, I believe we postponed this hearing because Commissioner Sheta had to leave early. And then we don't have Commissioner Shabeta here today, but in reviewing the materials, I couldn't find anywhere in our materials a restrictive declaration for no parking, which is a requirement of the fire department. And I looked through the HOA, and Tony looked through the HOA.
Wait, this is Northern Boulevard.
Yeah.
Oh,
we're
Yeah, I
right.
don't know that that's.
Remember
I'm
the
sorry,
case
I'm
last
sorry.
week?
I'm sorry.
This is the,
I'm sorry. I'm all confused. I wrote
This is the
postpone
restaurant?
because Commissioner Sheta wasn't present at the hearing.
Yeah, that's the
Right.
one.
But this is the one where he
Oh,
has to
oh,
give
I'm
his-
sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Apologies, take everything back, re-roll. Why don't you reread the
Yes,
heading?
recall.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's item number 6.
And then cut that part.
268-14BZ, 231-0610 Northern Boulevard, Queens. This is a variance, proposed enlargement of an existing use group 6 eating and drinking establishment.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, I think switching the calendar sometimes.
Yeah,
just,
that's
like,
part of
throws
the
everybody
problem. I'm
off.
so confused where we are. Okay. So, so actually, because we read out our own comments, I think, at the last
Yes.
hearing.
Yes,
But Commissioner Sheta hadn't, and there were structural questions.
Yeah, I did look at it, and I see that they are leaning a lot on the contamination that existing on site. My understanding is that spill was like remediated and closed, and I see that they mentioned that the contents in the groundwater was like better than previously. However, they are still like claiming hardship based on groundwater contamination. They are talking about like significant remediation cost. The stormwater drainage is gonna cost them too much. The groundwater table is kind of high. The high groundwater table was claimed based on the visual inspection of soil samples that appear to be wet. This is not the way to claim high groundwater. When we do test borings, usually the inspection engineer pick a piece of material, soil, and look at it and see whether it's dry or moist or wet. And that's how we kind of anticipate where the groundwater is. But for the sake of an application like this, we cannot count on just looking at a piece of material and saying, yes, this is wet groundwater is here. They have to have some monitoring wells, take some data over time to prove it to us that the groundwater is really high. And I believe they did. But I haven't seen groundwater monitoring data in their documents, and I haven't seen a geotech report actually. What I saw is just what we call it TR4 form that's presented to the DOB. The TR form is kind of a form filled based on the geotechnical report data. So the actual geotechnical report was not submitted unless it's somewhere and I couldn't find it. They are talking about two existing sewer lines. One is for Storm, and I believe the other one is 54-inch. Yeah, this is the one for Storm, and the other one is 18-inch. for regular sewer. They are saying that they cannot, during construction, they cannot put the effluent of the groundwater during dewatering, something like that, into these two lines. I'm not sure if this is accurate. Typically, the city allows people to put discharge, of course, after treatment and making sure that it's not severely contaminated, into the sewer system to a certain limit, and they charge for that. So I'm not sure why they are saying that they cannot put any discharge into the sewer system.
You're talking about the existing sewer lines for the gas station?
I'm talking about the existing sewer lines along Northern Boulevard. They said they have two lines, one is 54 inch, the other one I believe is 18 inches. And they are saying that during construction, if they need dewatering or they need like to drain the storm water during construction, they are not gonna be able to drain this water into the sewer system. My experience with the city is that the city allows people to do so to a certain limit of discharge. If you have a site and you're doing dewatering, you can take that dewatering discharge and put it into the sewer system, provided that it meets certain requirements for the DOB and the city. And in the meantime, it doesn't exceed certain limits, so it doesn't cause the sewer to flood. What they are saying is they are saying that they cannot put any discharge into the city system. I want to understand why.
So,
And even,
can I just ask a question? The way I read that was that the city isn't if they were to redevelop the site independently, that the city wouldn't allow them, independent of the restaurant, the city wouldn't allow them to connect to the existing sewer system. That's what I read, or I understood.
the way I'm looking at it, maybe I'm not correct, but the way I'm looking at it is they are talking about, because what they are talking about is the hardship.
Yes.
This is in the context of the hardship, and the hardship, it's kind of construction hardship. So the way I looked at it is they are talking about the dewatering discharge, the temporary construction dewatering discharge during construction. I'm not sure if the city is not gonna allow somebody to connect to its sewer system. I can't think of an action like that from the city side. Why? So if they are not allowed to connect to the city sewerage, to where they should be allowed to connect. I got this, like the city is not gonna allow us to put the discharge from the construction dewatering system into the city sewer system because it's contaminated.
Okay, so we obviously need them to clarify
Yes, they
this,
can
because-
clarify
yeah, yeah.
that. But like I said, they provided us with a report from LJCS saying that they might need capping to prevent infiltration of runoff water and migration of contaminant to adjacent wetlands. I'm not sure if this is gonna hurt. If you have rainwater, and even if you assume that this rainwater is gonna infiltrate into the groundwater table, it's gonna go to the aquifer, and it's gonna mix with the aquifer. I cannot think of this causing an increase in the contaminants levels. I believe the opposite is correct, because rainwater is presumably not
Presumably
contaminated.
cleaner,
So
yeah.
when it mixes with something contaminated, it might actually mitigate the contamination. And the second point is, they giving me the impression that when the rainwater falls and it infiltrates to the aquifer, it's gonna like make the water table get higher, and then because the water table is sloping towards the wetland, it's gonna cause flow of groundwater into the wetland, and the groundwater is originally contaminated. Previously, they said they did significant remediation back in 2012, 2014, so I'm not sure what was the impact of this remediation. After this remediation, was it like good to go? Was it clean? And if it was, what caused the contaminant levels to like be a concern again? They said they monitored the contaminant levels, and it was an, like, improvement in these levels. So I see like they are contradicting themselves here. So, and I'm not sure if they did any, like, multiple well monitoring, so they can see where the groundwater at location X and at location Y, and they conclude that the groundwater is moving towards the wetland. I didn't see that kind of like visualization in the documents again. So, and finally, the construction cost estimate, it's like usual. You can speculate, just, they leave it to our guess. So no details, just numbers. And honestly, I believe I said, like, not the last hearing, the hearing before, I said if I get construction cost estimate like that, I'm not gonna look at it, and I didn't look at this one. So they need to read whatever we posted before and follow that.
The administrative notice?
Yes,
Yes?
yes.
Okay, okay. And just to add, because we did have we all spoke about the project earlier, we received a letter with respect to another project on Northern Boulevard that's adjacent to Alley Pond Park, the same park, from Henry Euler, who's the head of the Auburndale Property Owners Association, Property Association, and also on the community board. He's writing as an individual concerned about the environmental impacts of all of these projects that we're looking at that are adjacent to Alley Pond Park in terms of the impact on the environment. So this one, I was talking a lot about this groundwater treatment, and they're talking about how they have this overflow into Alley Pond Park, and they also have some kind of filtration, and then it flows into Alley Pond Park. I find it very strange that stormwater would be, from a contaminated site, would be permitted for one to flow anywhere near into an adjacent wetland. It has to flow into the stormwater drainage system.
And if they have a problem of this groundwater migrating towards the wetland, I believe from the beginning, they should have looked at a solution that cut off this groundwater flow from reaching the wetlands. They should have put sheet piles or something like a continuous cutoff to contain, at least to one side or three sides, contain this contaminant, so it's not gonna flow towards the wetland. Meaning that if this is, let's say this is the side we're talking about, and the wetland is here, and the groundwater is flowing that way, I would put a sheet pile like this to make sure that groundwater is not gonna flow towards the wetland. But
Right.
I'm not sure if they like implemented this in the 2012 remediation. So
Right.
and honestly, what is the difference between constructing like with the restaurant or independent from the restaurant? What is the difference? Like
Right.
groundwater migration wise, what's the difference? You're gonna see if you construct this as a part of this establishment, or you just develop independently. I believe it's not.
Well, they're making some kind of an argument that I don't understand, which is something about not being allowed, if they develop the gas station site independently, to use the original sewer system, and therefore it would be very, very expensive for them to install a whole new sewer system connecting to the mains. And they're saying if they extended the restaurant use, then they can rely on the restaurant's own sewer system, therefore saving a lot of money. But they own both properties, and that's the question that I asked the last time. They own both properties, so what's the difference whether it's one part of the property is a restaurant and one part of the property is a convenience store or something like that? You can still use the system that you own. They're on both of yours, so.
It sounds like they are talking about site connection to the sewer.
Yeah, site connection, that's
If we're
different.
together, we gotta use the existing site connection. If we're
Right.
separate, we have to develop or to establish a new site connection. Otherwise, it's gonna be a mess. The cost will escalate on.
Right. Didn't you say
Except
that
the
there's a
site
storm?
costs are the same. across every single iteration. There's 1.5 million of premium costs, so I don't know that that's the argument. I think the argument is regardless of what they do to this property, they're going to incur those special costs. Because my question was, why, regardless of the footprint, is the cost going to be exactly the same? So it is listed as a premium cost in every scenario.
Here, now, the statement was that if the gas station site were a standalone, this is my notes of theirs, stormwater could be treated in retention tanks on site and then released into Alley Pond Park. And then the overflow would flow directly into the park. That's the statement they made as a standalone. And then if it were a combined,
It's the same thing. It's the 1.591.
No, yeah, maybe the price is the same, is different, is the same, but so then they're saying, if the properties are owned by the same owner, then the stormwater would be transported by drainage pipes onto the restaurant property. That was the argument about the two different approaches. Whether it's affecting the cost, I don't know. But that's part of the argument they're making, which
I
makes
believe
no
it's
sense to
partially
me.
affecting the cost, as far as I understand, because they are saying if we can save the stormwater site connection for the independent development and just use the existing one for the restaurant, that would save them money. I believe it's partially.
Right.
What they are saying, they are saying it's partially helpful for us. I believe their problem is two-sided. One is related to the contamination, and the other one is related to the storm water drainage. For the storm water drainage, yes, the independency issue here plays an important part. For the contamination, I'm struggling with this, because they said they did remediation previously, and now the contamination is an issue.
Right.
Whose fault did this? If you already done remediation in the past, 2012.
Worse, yeah.
If it worked, and per your statement of fact, you're saying that there is improvement in the contaminant levels in the groundwater. So what? Why are you claiming hardship because of the contaminant? And if it didn't work, so you already done some remediation, and you're saying it's not working. And honestly, if that's what they are saying, I believe they should be talking to somebody else, not to the BSA, to the DEB. Because if they did remediation and they are still monitoring like high contaminant levels, that they believe they need to implement another shot of remediation, they shouldn't be talking to us. They should be talking to the DEB.
Right, understood, okay. I know what you're saying in terms of the cost, so we need to check that, but they kind of repeated this argument about stormwater management. If the sites were separated, and the sites aren't separated, they're held in common ownership. But then I also, from an environmental perspective, I was shocked at the idea that stormwater would be allowed to move off-site. I thought DOB no longer allows stormwater to be handled off-site. It has to be handled on-site. And in addition, like, why aren't there adequate trench drains on the site for stormwater, or permeable surfaces, et cetera, to keep the stormwater on the property and away from.
Isn't
that's
it what
what it
it says?
says. It says they're gonna treat it on
Yeah, all
site.
stormwater must be collected and retained on-site, treated through filtration
No.
and discharged into
That's what it said.
Alley
Then,
Pond. And
Alley Pond Park, that's what I'm saying. Why are you discharging anything onto Alley Pond Park? No water should be discharged onto an adjoining property owner. And that's the basic rule of of DOB, that you retain the water on your own site, that you provide drains on your own site, that then if the stormwater can't filter into the ground because of planting and landscaping and so on, it goes into
And
storm
they
drains.
said the reason for that is because the northern boulevard slopes down towards the property and the drainage condition is unique, so the slope is going towards Alley Pond, so for them to push the water back up to.
No, it's not pushing it up, it's that you need to install drains, and because the idea is, you're treating contaminated water. Are you bringing it down to the point of incredible purity? Probably not. What kind of filtration brings it into purity, right? So you're draining contaminated groundwater and storm water that has filtered down and collected into the groundwater. As you say, there's no sheeting. So what's to prevent it from moving contaminated material into the adjoining property?
And I'm not sure what makes the stormwater contaminated, first place. Why? It's rainwater, it's not supposed to be like severely contaminated. So, and the groundwater table is 10 feet deep, below surface grade. So if you're picking stormwater, if you have a well-managed, like, drainage plan, like that side elevation, side grades, you manage them, you collect the surface runoff somewhere, and then you treat that. It's not supposed to be severely contaminated. It's not contamination like the one in the groundwater.
Right.
The groundwater is contaminated because of the past use of the gas station. So this is totally different kind of contamination here. But the stormwater, it's gonna touch the ground and then you collect
But
it.
isn't it implying, that a lot of this is about the idea that you're dispersing stormwater from your site onto somebody else's property, which I don't understand as a concept at all.
It's not up to them what they are saying, they are not gonna collect it and then take it and pump it in.
No, there's an
Yes,
overflow,
what they
it's
are saying
treated.
is it's gonna infiltrate, mix with the groundwater, then the groundwater gets like higher, the table gets higher.
No, that's not what they're saying. They are actually treating this water, and then somehow or other, there's a stormwater management system, and it's going to somehow then send the treated water into Alley Pond Park. And to the extent that there's overage that's more than the system can handle, that's just going to flow directly into the park. I don't understand this concept at all from an environmental impact perspective.
I'm assuming this is going to be reviewed in the SECRA analysis, and DEP and others will
Right.
have to weigh in on it.
Yes. So
We definitely need to look at how DEP is going to review this and what their requirements would be.
Right.
I definitely don't have the expertise to clearly understand that.
Right.
Yeah,
So I-
and
I
for
would-
the,
Well, we
for
can
the
certainly ask the
contamination,
questions
for the
and direct.
contamination-based cost, I couldn't see like I don't wanna say RAB, but again, I'm like puzzled. Are they done with the contamination remediation back in 2012? If the answer is yes, so why we're talking about the contamination in 2018?
Does the
And if-
record include anything about the 2014 or 2012 remediation? Like the extent of it, what they did, or?
Only that they were fully compensated by the oil
Polluter,
company, the
yeah.
polluter.
Would that information be helpful as to what they did for the remediation?
No, I care about what is coming, what's gonna cost them for this kind of construction or development.
Okay.
And in order for us to quantify the cost for this, we need the scope of contamination treatment, how they gonna excavate, what is the extent of the
For this,
excavation.
okay, for this.
We don't have this kind of information.
Okay.
But I think they said they're not going to be using the costs of remediation,
Right.
right?
But they are using the costs of the continued monitoring and filtration
Yes.
of the water.
Yeah, right, okay. Okay. Move on? Yeah.
Continued hearing items in the SOC calendar, item number 7, 67753BC, 6128 Fresh Meadow Lanes, Queens.
They requested an adjournment.
Item number 8, 60-82BZ, 60-11 Queens Boulevard, Queens.
So this one was marked on our list as being adjourned, but they filed it timely, so it's not adjourned. So they provided photos of the car wash and water lines removed from the site, and from the photos, the site looks very clean. They also included a trash enclosure, newly built. They need to install the rest of the landscaping to comply with the plans, however, before we vote on this. And I saw some extraneous signage that wasn't shown on the
Those have been
drawings.
removed.
Yeah,
They have, the
they made
photos
submission,
didn't show them
resubmission.
removed, that's why.
No, they submitted a revised.
A revised photo taking the
On Friday, and I was
Coca-Cola
there
sign?
on the site
Oh, okay.
this weekend, and there aren't any extraneous signs.
I just had a question, and since you were there at the site, you might be able to answer it. Photo number 3 had a car sitting at a concrete island, and that concrete island had cables attached. What were those for, if not was that where the car wash was, and what's there now?
Right, so that was one of my concerns, so I did go specifically for that. And so those two islands, one is an air pump, and the other one is the vacuum. Now, the only thing is, I think there are 2 new vacuum pumps that's been added to the eastern side of the lot, which I don't know if the drawing has picked up on it. So they just need to kind of revise the drawings. I didn't have a chance to look at the drawings, honestly. Went by the site yesterday.
So, but what were you asking about, Commissioner Otley Brown? You were asking about the,
Oh, on the concrete, there were photos that
Right.
showed the concrete island where the car wash was.
Right.
But instead of it just being a concrete island, there were still cables.
Yeah,
and
yeah. Oh, I
cords, And I
see.
just wanted to know, what was it if not the car wash? And so, yes, the
Yeah,
vice chair
right.
has told us it is an air machine.
Right.
oh, I see, okay.
So the one closest to the Queens Boulevard has the air machine, and the next island, there are 3 cars parking spaces in between, and the one away from the Queens Boulevard has the vacuum.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. So then the only open issue is the landscape.
And just they need to make sure that the drawing.
Shows the extra air
Shows the
pumps.
extra 2
Yeah, and just
vacuums.
mark all the parking spaces, because now there are 3 parking spaces, additional parking spaces between those 2 islands. So they just need to mark that in the plan.
Okay.
For the car wash piping, I recall that we asked them to submit signed and sealed drawings with the locations for these pipings dashed and point to it and say previous car wash piping removed.
Well, they didn't have the right to have the car wash in there in the first place. So we told them to take the lines of the piping out and to actually remove them in real life so that it brings it back to the approved condition.
Okay.
So that's why you don't see the pipes. It'd be different if we had approved the car wash and then the instruction was take it out.
Okay.
Then you'd have to see sort of demolition of the existing condition.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Because they actually removed it and they provided photos to show that they removed it.
Yeah, and I saw that they mentioned this in the submission letter.
Right.
too.
Yeah, and the plan also clearly indicates one is an air pump and the other one is a vacuum station.
Okay.
Okay.
Item number 9, 540-84BZ, 341 Soundview Avenue, the Bronx.
This was administratively adjourned.
Item number 10, 3191BZ, 173 Kingsland Avenue, Brooklyn.
So they requested another adjournment. This is the 3rd adjournment in a row since February. Do you have more information on this?
I reached out to DOB, the chief plan examiner, and I'm going to try to get some help from them because if you recall, this is an extension of term and an amendment, and the board wasn't sure about the signage because it
Right.
doesn't comply with C1 zoning regulations.
Right,
awning sign.
the awning,
awning
yeah.
signage, so I'm going to try to get clarification from. But
Okay.
he has, the applicant himself has reached out to
When we say reach out is one thing, but DOB doesn't work with outreach, it works with ZRD1s and CCD1s. And I didn't see any sign that they actually filed one of those. So just trying to contact people doesn't work at DOB, you've got to actually have a formal request.
So you want a ZRD1?
Yeah, that's what we
or-
said at the hearing way back in February, right? So, back in the day, you used to just make an appointment with a commissioner and ask the question. That's
Yeah.
not how it works anymore.
Yeah, February 27th, you
We
asked.
did specifically ask
Yes.
for ZRD1.
I'm sorry, can we clarify?
So the issue is, we're actually trying to help on this. Otherwise, the awning just doesn't comply and would have to come down. We see awning, or let's say the signage on the awning doesn't comply. We see awnings on restaurants absolutely all the time.
Yes.
They almost always have lettering on the skirt, right? So what I had suggested is that the applicant apply for a ZRD1 and get clarification on whether they could have the kind of signage that they propose on the skirt of the awning, right?
Yeah,
And-
it's contrary to 32-653.
Right, but
We have
awnings,
to just be clear that this isn't a residential district, so.
right, but so
It has
awnings,
to comply with the equivalent of a C1.
right, it has to comply with the,
C1.
But it doesn't comply with this.
no, it doesn't. So what I was suggesting is, in a residential district, you're allowed to have canopies and awnings over the entrance to residences and community facilities, right? And they limit the kinds of signage that you have there. So or they don't, or it's actually pretty liberal in terms of what's allowed on a canopy or an awning. So I was suggesting that they look at the regulations on awnings, both in the zoning and in the building code. And I think part of it is the language of whether they use the word awning or the word canopy. One of them is more liberal than the other. Now, it's been so long that I've forgotten which one. So, is the building that complies, the 92.
Yeah, I think it's the awning that's more limited,
Its projection is limited.
or the size of the text, of the text on the
So
awning.
the
is
size
limited.
of the text is not complying with C1.
Because in the February 27th hearing, Chair Palmetto, you said, I think we meant limitation of 12 square feet typically over an awning so that people can stand on the sidewalk and make for a taxi. And you said that it makes me think this isn't an awning, but is instead a canopy. But that's a conversation you should have with the
Right,
Department of Health.
yes.
But I think that section also says canopy, 32-653.
In either event, it's the applicant prosecuting the
Yeah.
case should get that determination.
Right, and my understanding was that if you call it a canopy versus an awning, one way or the other, you have a little more leeway with that, either under the building code and/or the zoning resolution. So that was my recommendation, because we can't grant a variance for the signs. That's what this was all about, right?
But also in the alternative, could the applicant just take off the awning? from the
Yeah, of
sign?
course. So but I can see that they don't want to do that. It wraps around and creates their outdoor seating area and all that, so. And they could also just take, what's alter sign? I don't know. They could also just take the signage off the awning, and then as long as the awning complies with whatever the overhang restrictions are on awnings/canopies, you're good, and then there wouldn't be any signage at all on the awning/canopy.
And I think that
whichever thing.
that's probably for the businesses, not the.
Right.
Because it's in the shadow of BQE, it's not at all visible from any street frontage, so the awning kind of projects out, gives some amount of visual cue, which is absent.
Right. But point is that I think we should give them a lot of time to work this out. I mean, but they have to file a ZRD1 or a CCD1, or they're never going to get to have a conversation with DOB. And I don't really understand why it's too long to be waiting from February. I mean, we get turnarounds on ZRD1s much, much faster than that. And someone told me that they're turning them around at DOB much more quickly than they were last year, say. So,
Just for clarity, just because we're going to put this off for some time,
Mm-hmm.
in the event that they opt to remove it, or,
Yeah.
I mean, would there be like a limitation that the board would accept, like say C1, something that?
no,
is
we
a
already
promote-
said C1.
Yeah.
This exceeds C1 by a lot.
That was
That's
part of
the
the
issue.
prior resolution. The prior resolution limited it to C1.
And this is, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 11, 32205BZ, 69-69 Main Street, Queens. This was also administratively adjourned. Item number 12, 40-06BZ, 10 Hanover Square, Manhattan. The drawings are much improved because before it didn't have doors.
But I didn't find ADA access to the subcellar level.
There is one. I
Oh,
found
you found it? Oh.
Elevator. Yeah, so you take the main elevator down to the cellar, and then you go to the main gym area, and it's on the other end. Well, there's a staircase also.
Well, no, I'm talking about the
And there is
ADA.
an ADA elevator that connects from the cellar to the subcellar, which is just for the gym.
There's an elevator that connects
Right.
local
That was one
one-stop
of my concern, and I think they submitted the plan and submitted a letter clearly saying there is a separate elevator connecting the cellar to the subcellar, and I did check that.
Yeah,
Okay.
because when I looked at this, I couldn't figure it out either, and then she explained it, and
Right.
I said, no, you need to
Yeah.
revise that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we got the fire department letter?
Yeah, then,
Uh-huh.
sorry, hold on one second. All right, so they had open issues with respect to the Schedule A and the operating permit for the public assembly, and was a violation on the fire alarm. Those things have to be resolved.
We got
Does it-
something from the fire department.
More recently?
Yes.
Oh, maybe just today. Did we just get something today?
Friday, and they did approve, they issued a letter of approval and no objection to applying for Schedule A after
Okay.
applying for TCO. That's what the letter stated. No, I'm actually using my notes.
Okay. Okay.
You're okay with the plan? Do you want to see the plan?
I saw the plan.
Oh, okay.
I just couldn't find the elevator, so I was looking I stayed with the banks, and there's no bank landing
I
in the
made the same
subcellar.
mistake.
So
It's,
it's up
It's
there
there.
somewhere.
so
Okay.
you enter, once you go to the locker
She made
room,
a submission.
it's right there, and that takes to the subcellars, which
Okay.
is, it's conveniently located, because you do. go to
Well,
the
you
locker
have to
room.
go to the cellar first to enter the gym anyway.
Right, and you have the locker room right there,
Right,
so it's right
right.
next to that,
Yes.
so I think it's
Okay.
well placed.
Item number 13, 25413BZ, 2881 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn. This is being withdrawn.
Yes.
New cases on the SOC calendar. Item number 14, 39061BZ, 148 150 East 33rd Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application out of notice of hearing to officials. I didn't find a community board recommendation. And I thought the site looks good, and I didn't have any other comments.
I had one question, and it wasn't clear from the plan, if there is any lighting provided on the rooftop. I did some aerial, Google aerial, it wasn't quite clear, so, and the reason for asking that question is the building to the east, to the west of it is a residential building with windows facing the staircase, so that's why I'm asking that question. And based on a site visit, I did notice there was.
Facing the staircase,
Not the stair,
facing the garage.
facing the roof.
The roof,
of the
okay.
garage, yes. And there was barbed wire on the rooftop on the east side of the lot line. And I understand why that is there, because it's there on every floor and it's in our approved plan, not the barbed wire, but some kind of a metal protection that projects out from the building, which is in our plan, which is to prevent any kind of vandalism, like climbers. But on the rooftop, instead of that metal plate, it's a barbed wire. So I just wanted a clarification. on
It
that.
shouldn't be barbed wire. We don't like barbed wire.
Right, so if that metal
We
plate
no
can be
longer
placed,
live in a prison
that might be
state.
better.
Don't we? Sorry.
Barbed
Sorry. I'm sorry.
I mean, actually, I have to say, the idea of a parking garage in this location these days, I find astonishing, because you look at how valuable that site has become with the
Very, very
change
utilized
of.
parking
Yeah,
space.
you would think they'd
Because-
want to build more building with the parking garage underneath
I used to
it.
live in that
Yeah.
neighborhood, and there were other parking spaces which did get developed and
Mm-hmm.
open parking lots. And so now the demand has picked up enough where.
I'm not
these
saying it
spaces are-
shouldn't be a parking garage. I'm just saying it is in prime, developed Midtown, now Hudson Yards, et cetera. There's just, the idea that it's only a parking garage is surprising, anyway.
Okay.
Okay.
Item number 15, 170-92BZ, 23204 Northern Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends approval with 32 in favor and 2 opposed. This is the application for which we have a letter from Henry Euler, acting on his own and expressing concern about the environmental impact of this project and several others now before us on adjacent Alley Pond Park. A condition of approval with respect to this case has been the recycling of water and installation of water oil separators. I think we should also inquire how drainage is working on the site and how water flow and runoff, not storm runoff, but the runoff from the car wash is directed relative to the adjacent park. I saw in the drawings there are trench drains, but I want to understand better the effectiveness of these drains in handling the flow. They should also be demonstrating compliance with the BSA conditions for water reclamation, which they didn't mention. And there was supposed to be a chain link gate on the property that's closed at night. I didn't see any sign of a chain link fence along the front property line. The structure that's being requested is described as a canopy. That's actually a structure. It's a roof and sidewalls, whether or not they're made out of fencing. So I think that's an effective enlargement of the project. It's enclosed on 4 sides. That's floor area. So, yeah, so that's something to discuss about operations. I understand sort of why that would be less of an annoying. There's annoyance issues here because you've got all these commercial uses, but I can understand it would be less annoying that all this work goes on the interior, independent of whether the workers are working in the elements. But it's an issue because it's a very large enlargement of the prior grant in terms of floor area.
But also the site is significantly big and a good portion of the site has been left undisturbed. So the operation is really in a very small section of the entire site. So in terms of the total floor area, if we are to consider it that way, I'm not sure if that.
Right, but so that would be an amendment of the variance, and so then that's the kind of a question, right? It's a 1993 variance, so then you're looking at how do you work on the minimum variance necessary? How do you work on, you need to make those arguments that somehow or other the use requires this additional space in order to something, right? Those arguments need to be made.
Is the additional floor area contrary to zoning? Would it require additional waivers?
Well, it's an R, the use is, it's an
right,
R1,
it's a use waiver.
So it would
Yeah.
be increased in the
Degree of
amount
non,
Yeah, significant increase.
So, I mean, in
But just
terms
I'm
of the
not
use, but in terms of the use that was in, as per the plan, it was always being used as the area where the cars would assemble and the start of the treatment will happen. So
Right.
it's like operationally, it was always
Yeah,
there.
it's
They're
still-
just putting a cover on top of it, which is not a structural cover, it's really a temporary, because you can remove it. It's a tent with no structural.
canvas.
It's like a canvas, blue canvas with those
Yes,
very
no,
thin metal poles that is standing on the
It
ground.
has-
It's not.
Wait a minute, it has
So-
trusses, it's a structure, it has trusses that end up having columns that are mounted into small foundations, otherwise the thing falls down, and it has a fence all the way around it to create enclosure.
That
I don't-
fence actually is there as part of the prior approval because they wanted to keep this space operation separate from that open space that it's the wide, and that was part of the requirement that there had to be a fence between that operation and
So,
and
I
that
guess-
fence is there.
I just look at it as, what's the definition of floor area? If we have the
enclosed.
school that we're going to discuss at next, right? And the school is so concerned about putting up an acoustical fence which would make life easier for them, and they can't because it's going to increase the floor area without having a roof. They're going to have an acoustical fence, they could, and that would increase the floor area because it's enclosed on 4 sides. So I don't see how this isn't the creation of floor area, so then we would need to look at, is that okay? right?
But what to Vice Chair Chanda's point, that this is always space that has been
Yes,
utilized by this
right.
operation. And so does the conversion of it to floor area really increase the degree of nonconformance?
To me, it does not.
No.
was
It
already
increases the
utilized?
degree of nonconformance because it's an increase in floor area, right? Whereas the use, one's floor area and one's whether you're expanding the use in an open lot, right? It's like it's two different zoning characteristics. You could have a lumber yard, right, where the lumber is all over the zoning lot. So you have increased or let's say it's all over one half of the zoning lot. And then they come and they say, actually, we want to put lumber on the other half of the zoning lot. So then we're expanding the use, or
Yeah.
rather, I think the term is extending the use onto the rest of the zoning lot.
right.
But if it was covering the whole zoning lot already, then you're saying, all right, the use
Understood.
is still extended. But that's separate because the lumber yard has no floor area on it, right?
Sure.
But if you build a building now to put the lumber in, you're increasing the degree of noncompliance because there's no floor area permitted for the use.
Can you increase the degree to which a use that's only permitted by variance does not have any bulk regulation? Like, there's no bulk regulations for this use in this district because we're permitting a use waiver.
Well, but let's just play this out. If you went to the Department of Buildings and you added that structure at the back, DOB would send you back here saying you're increasing the degree of noncompliance, it does not comply
It
with
doesn't
the
comply with
BSA.
BSA approved plans.
I have a
approval.
sorry,
Right.
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, just, I think, and again, this is just to be clear, so the
Yeah.
applicant. is
Yes,
clear.
knows what to do.
I think between what the chair and the vice chair was saying, I think that because the area of the lot that's been utilized as part of the car wash, personally, I don't see this as an extension of the use. I think the question comes as to whether just covering it increases the degree of something. But I don't know that it's compliance because there is no underlying bulk regulations guiding this use in a residential district. So I think that
But it's also not increasing the degree of nonconformance because it's still on the part of the
Yeah.
zoning lot that was always granted the use waiver.
Yeah.
I agree.
So I think
It's
maybe
not
there
an
might be a DOB
extension.
determine, there'd be a
Yeah.
DOB
I mean,
hand in
the
this,
reason I'm saying we
perhaps.
need to be careful about adding this to floor areas because we do see homes with greenhouses. We don't count that in the floor area, greenhouse.
Sorry,
Yes, we
greenhouses
do.
are
We
floor
tell them they
area.
have to calculate the floor area of the space that's
Yeah,
a
that's a little
greenhouse
bit-
into the
No,
special permit.
greenhouses are very specifically floor area in the zoning resolution. The 6-foot extension
But
into
we
the
do
rear
not-
yard is a permitted obstruction,
But you have
that's
to
all.
count it as floor
But
area.
I thought we have approved a few of the small home enlargement where the greenhouse was going to be subject to DOB approval.
That has to do with the permitted obstruction. So we weren't, since on those 622s, we have a limit on the 20-foot rear yard, right? And they often propose a greenhouse that extends into the 20-foot rear yard. We don't opine on, and we can't grant a waiver on permitted obstruction into the required rear yard. So that's DOB's call, whether they wanted to consider that
it's a little different.
6-foot greenhouse part of it. We asked them to include the floor area of the greenhouse in the calculation, because if they don't include it, we didn't waive it, they don't get it, right? So that's really a different thing. What we don't count as floor area
I
are the little
misunderstood
garages, which sometimes illegally get converted into residential space, but that's not part of our domain, we don't see it. It's not before us. So,
So should they get a ZRD1 from DOB
Maybe they
that opines on the issue of whether putting up the canopy in conjunction with the existing fencing turns this into floor area?
Perhaps. It also sounds like there should be some greater description of what this is. The chair seems to have seen something more permanent, whereas the vice chair saw something temporary. I don't know.
I know what it is. It's made out of canvas, but I'm using exactly the same condition of the school with the acoustical fencing, which, by the way, is effectively fabric that you hang on a chain link fence, and they're certain, and I believe they're right, that because the fence is tall, it encloses their outdoor terrace in 4 walls, creates floor area, therefore they can't do it, so they had to find another solution, right? And so, That's the definition of floor area, enclosed on 4 sides.
But I think it would be
Or 4
helpful.
sides and a roof.
I think it would be helpful, though, for DOB to
Yeah.
just weigh in.
That's fine.
That's-
Well, I think that DOB should weigh in because we have to officially address it, and we don't have an objection with respect to that.
And as, I'm just going by the project description, I don't know that an amendment has been filed for.
It says extension of term and amendment.
Oh, it is?
It does, yeah. Yeah.
It says.
It has been filed for.
Yeah, amendment, right.
Just looking at procedure.
I think the amendment is for what they call a canopy or an awning. A canopy.
Yeah, it's
So-
for the amendments for the canopy.
Right, but a canopy is like at a gas station, this thing that flies over and supported by 2 columns. That's the canopy in a gas station. This is not that. So,
Okay.
But I'll be curious because there are a lot of operations where within their site, they have like a canopy under which they have produces and things being sold, but that doesn't get counted as floor area. So we just have to think of how it gets applied other ways, so.
okay. Okay, the hours of operation, let me see. No, there was more, okay. Also, the existing signage exceeds the 150 square foot allowable, so the excess signage needs to be removed because they're asking for even more. But it's quite strange, the grant was very specific in the drawings as to which signs were permitted, but it seems like, because the drawings are so unclear, 268 square feet was allowed instead of 150, which is the maximum. I don't understand how that happened exactly. The drawings are kind of bumpy, like they're admitting they have too much, but then it says, we'll comply with C1, which it doesn't.
It only has one frontage?
No,
It has one
frontage.
frontage, but it has a sign on the side also. And that was also included in the total signage analysis, even though that's a side lot, technically would not get counted. But
Yeah.
I guess because these are all standalone buildings, maybe that's why that's how I was reading it, is that the building, the signage in the front complied with the 150 square foot requirement, but the signage on the side of the building was also included in the sign analysis, which added to total 268.
Signage visible from the street, et cetera, et cetera. I mean,
I don't know, but that's how I read it, but it wasn't clear from the resolution.
To clarify.
so we should clarify, but, that's the thing, if the board approved 268 square feet, whether or not they meant to, I have a trouble taking away when it was approved, very specifically in drawings. So there's landscaping referred to in the statement of facts, but when you look on the drawings, it's all located on somebody else's property, so I don't really understand that. I didn't see any landscaping on the approved plans that are on the property itself. I actually don't understand that at all. And then the hours of operation shown on the approved plans are Monday to Saturday, 7 a.m. to 10:30 p.m., and Sunday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The proposed are Monday to Sunday, 7 a.m. to 12 a.m. That wasn't mentioned in the statement of facts. So it seems as if they're asking for a change in the hours without telling us. Any other comments on this? Okay.
Item number 16, 13204BZ, 310 East Houston Street, Manhattan.
Okay. We have proof of service of initial application and proof of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board 3 recommends denial unless the applicant promises to withdraw the waiver to convert the community facility to residential and will maintain the community facility use in perpetuity. I believe in response to the Community Board recommendation, the owner sent submitted a kind of a later submission, which effectively abandons the approvals in the 2014 letter of substantial compliance and no longer proposes to convert the second floor to residential or to enlarge the penthouse, except that the stair storage area at the first floor that connects to a bridge at the second floor was built, I think. And also, I didn't really understand because there is an 8th floor penthouse which was not in the original approval. So I believe that was built. So it's kind of confusing about what's an as-built. It doesn't show up, the 8th floor penthouse doesn't show up in the certificate of occupancy and was not on the 2004 plans. And on the 2014 plans, it isn't shown as a new addition. So it looks like something happened in between the letter of substantial compliance request and construction, or the approval in 2004. There seems to be a lot of floor area creep in the application history. The approved lot area in 2004 was lot area creep, right? So in 2004, it was 7,860 square feet in the resolution. And in this 2014 letter of substantial compliance, it was 7,901 square feet. And now they're saying they got another survey and it's 7,975 square feet. So I guess the rule is you just hire a lot of different surveyors and it just keeps improving. So they need to provide all of the surveys, and the surveyor, who's a licensed professional, who signs and seals and takes enormous responsibility for the accuracy of their surveys, that person has to explain the discrepancies, okay? Signed and sealed. Statement of facts has inconsistent floor areas, but I'm not surprised because the lot area has changed so many times. If the discrepancy is between the 2004 approval and the 2014 approval, the total floor area of which may not have been built, that should be clarified. The numbers are just sliding all around and I actually don't understand. And I'm actually very confused with all of the submissions and what the total floor areas were at the time of the 2004 approval. If you're not getting the theme, what was built pursuant to the 2014 letter of substantial compliance and what is proposed here, because nothing matches, and I have cut and pasted all the varying totals that are in every document. None of them match. Also, speaking of enclosed on 3 or more sides, doesn't the area under the bridge, which has a covering, so the first floor has the level at grade has a bridge over it, and it's enclosed on 3 sides. So I'm wondering if that counts as floor area. And unlike what's shown in the 2004 and 2018 plans, the second floor terrace, which is the first floor roof, is actually the full depth of the lot. In the plans, it's shown as this little skinny thing that runs along, but it's actually the full depth. So 3 sides and a roof. With respect to the Bella Vista test about selling the development rights, the tax lot was subdivided only 2 years after the grant. So I'm wondering whether that actually passes the test. Sounds like they had plans. And why would it have been subdivided with the zoning remaining as it is, except that it was the site was underdeveloped by approximately 2,000 square feet, which in 2004 was selling. There was pretty nice value for excess floor area. I also disagree with the statement in the statement of facts that the amount of available residential floor area wasn't taken into account when the board agreed to allow commercial use at the first floor. If there had been more residential floor area, the variance wouldn't have been needed because there would have been a reasonable return, unless its use would have in fact been impossible because of the setbacks. But I don't see that because we see penthouses. So, and we know, yeah,
As regards to the financials, I think the way they were referring to it is that the financials, the site value is calculated based on physical square feet and not available building area, which was the procedure that was used a lot of the time pre-me, certainly. So pre-2006. And so I think that that's what they're talking about, because that doesn't take into account remaining floor area and whether or not it was valued. And so the way in which they actually calculated this financial report to talk about whether or not the sell-off of that parcel of land would affect the return was by calculating straight square footage of that little extra piece and then selling it off like fictitiously at the time of the original grant.
okay. Can't spell fictitiously. At the time of the grant, okay. Also, if this, so that's actually, was my question. If the site was underdeveloped under the 2004 variance, were the value of the TDRs considered in the analysis? The answer is no.
No.
Because in those days, they didn't do it. Okay. Okay. Please.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
Yes, I could just say, just in continuation of what I said, was what they did do is they went back to the sales price per physical square foot that they used in 2004 to calculate the entire site value, and then just took the portion that was now Lot 40 and sold it off at that price. So basically, their statement is that that would not have impacted the return, and they showed us it's like a minimal additional return. However, they're acknowledging that now, if you were to value that land on an available building area per square foot basis, it would amount to what it actually is about to sell for, or just sold for, which is over $500,000.
Okay. So, in terms of the analysis, it's similar to our other Bella Vista cases where we looked, was there anybody to sell it to? Yes, there was somebody to sell it to, but it only was worth this much, and there was only 2,000 square feet.
Available.
Right, and they have it as $101 a square foot. So it's not really addressing the issue of what was available at that time and what it would have sold as. What it is addressing is the fact that it was not considered because the methodology at the time did not take that into account, and that was accepted by the board. That's basically what it's saying. It's like, we didn't take that into account at the time. The methodology we put forth was to value physical square foot. Physical square feet was the way in which the board calculated site value at the time. Therefore, we met that threshold, and if we had sold off that portion back then, it would not have impacted the return at all. Now, in order to address whether or not they appropriately valued the development rights, you would have to go back in time and find out what the price per developable square foot would have been for the entire site at that time in 2004, and then consider the scenario where you sold off part of it.
So wait, but when we look at some of the other cases that are oftentimes conversions of existing buildings in manufacturing districts, where the only allowable use in the district that might have bought development rights were hotels. But in the 70s, because that's when those were granted, nobody would build a hotel in those districts, right?
That was a different argument. Those were old grants, and it was easy to make the argument that development rights were just taking off, and nobody was going to make use of them, and nobody was really selling them. And then we have other cases where they come before us and they say, well, while maybe somebody might have bought them, there were no receptors adjacent or adjacent to adjacent that could even do anything with it. So that's how they dealt with the Bella Vista findings. But this is not that case, because this is far more recent in time, and there were development rights at the time. So the way they address it is that the board was satisfied back then, and if we then use the methodology that the board was satisfied, there was no impact in selling off that little portion of land. So the question is, do we want to reopen this? And bearing in mind that reopening this is reopening the determinations made by the 2004 board that the minimum variance was met based on that methodology. If you reopen it and revalue it in a different way, you could perhaps undermine that grant by saying, well, now that we're looking at it, even using 2004 figures, they were way overshooting the minimum variance. So then you're reopening that grant, and then what do you do when you do that? You
Right.
can't undo what was done.
Well, but you can say that it was the minimum variance, and then, no, you can't expand your zoning law. Because that's the question. Is there a windfall profit? That's the Bella Vista test. Is there windfall? But if you were, and I didn't do a careful calculation on what the excess development rights were in 2004, but if they were around 2,000 square feet, and they were selling it, and let's just say, for argument's sake, $100 a square foot was the going rate, which is easy enough to check because I'm sure there are newspaper articles about 2004 TDR sales. In this area, maybe, because that was the beginning of the kind of the East Village getting hot, right? So if you were to do that, and then say it arguably didn't undermine so you're saying the fear is that you're undermined.
You would undermine it unless you reopen the entire financial and value the site based on TDRs. Otherwise, it's going to be a windfall. If you're saying there's 7,900 physical square feet and that's all this is worth, however, we want to sell off 3,000 ABASF, available building area, then of course it's going to be a windfall. Because you're adding a lot more. What they have basically said is it was valued as if it was physical square feet, and therefore we sold off physical square
Right, I
feet, of which there was only 473 physical square feet. If you're now going to say we value this as 7,000 physical square feet, but somebody could have sold off 3,000 additional TDRs, it's like a windfall. It's going to look like a windfall. The only way it wouldn't look like a windfall is if you revalue the 7,975 square feet as if it's available building area at that price, and then showed the sale of some of those development rights.
So I'm having trouble how we passed the Bella Vista test then. How do we establish, for one, they subdivided the lot 2 years after, which is the same time. Bella Vista was either 4 years or 2 years. It was super close in
Can I ask a
time.
question? Subdividing the lot does not change the definition of the zoning lot.
No,
So
you're
this-
just preparing, it's, why would you subdivide into a separate tax lot unless they can explain it?
Well, I think it was for the condo, like that building, the building on the condo lot was being separated out from the rest of the non-condo lot.
No.
That's what,
No, so you
And that has been
separate,
done.
they have commercial condos, which this is not about. That little triangle at the front that became Lot 40, as far as I know, has no independent commercial value. It'd be different if that was a second commercial condo located on that little triangle, and they had another commercial condo that was part of the subject of the variance. When you look at the block and lot number, it's just 7501, and you don't see that it was subdivided into commercial condos. So it may be actually that the condo owns that commercial space and gets income from it, which is common, right? So that's part of the common areas, right? There isn't any understandable reason for why they would have created a separate tax lot for that lot, except that it was in preparation for the eventual subdivision, because it's just a lot easier from the point of view, as you studied, to sell development rights when you have a tax lot number assigned to an eventual zoning lot subdivision. So they would need to explain why in the world, 2 years after the grant, they subdivided the tax lot, because it starts to look like they were planning on selling off their 2,000 square feet. And, you know, I was looking at it, it's like, how long was the rezoning in the works? The upzoning in the works, because I know that especially in the East Village, it's super political, lots and lots of talk about it. So it's possible that they knew very early on that they were going to benefit from an upzoning. So you know, those are the things that are the Bella Vista test. That's our question here. That's really the only thing that's before us is, does this pass Bella Vista? So I think maybe a little more clarity on how we get past Bella Vista.
Right, and I think that that's going to be revaluing it in the way it should have probably been valued back then, acknowledging the development rights of the entire development. And then also talking about the development rights today as well.
Okay.
I'm a little concerned about the direction here, partly because the way I see it is that back in 2004, the site was zoned R7 too.
Correct.
And they built the site, after that subdivided the site. And, you know, the construction started, must have been, it didn't start in anticipation. If it knew that it was going to be rezoned to R8A, if the plans were in play for a long time, assuming the argument that you used, then they would have probably been better off holding it back and let the 2008 rezoning come in play, which would have upzoned the site, and then they wouldn't have had to come for any.
But it's not even about that.
It's not
It was not built to the max back in 2004.
Yeah, I understand.
And so just by dividing it out and holding it, forget the upzoning, was there an upzoning
Yeah,
or not?
doesn't matter.
The fact that they held out a portion of it and gave it a new lot number means they were contemplating at some point that this 2,000 square feet that we didn't build is worth something to us.
Right.
Let's see if we could sell it. Then the upzoning came. Or maybe it was like 1,000 square feet, then the upzoning came and gave them more. But I think that the chair has a good point, which is when you're subdividing something, even if you don't sell it right away, it's an acknowledgement of the inherent value of that.
Right.
That thing that you are, because you're like, let's separate this out, let's keep this on the side, you know, we don't know. Maybe we'll get lucky, maybe somebody next door wants this. We have some excess here that the board didn't look at.
Yes. And the other thing that I would say, having done this for a living, that's one of the things I used to do for a living, right? You don't subdivide the zoning lot early, because this is this very long property, and you have contiguity with so many sites, and you don't know where the development site's where the soft site's gonna be, right? So maybe you strip that little triangle of its development rights and you move it on to the main lot. Or, because that's done quite a lot, you create a park bench development site, right? Or you move all of your excess development rights onto the triangle, and then it's a clean, empty site, and you transfer all of that over to your developer. So you don't want to start deciding where the zoning lot formation is, because you need your contiguity. Or maybe you don't divide it at all, because you're still good, right? So you don't really know what you want to do with that. But the Lot 40 can hold all the development rights in it. You can also hold them above a plane, right? There's a lot of ways to hold on to development rights. And I didn't actually look, well, they didn't do the transfer yet. That's what this is about, so. But yeah, this is about the case of Bella Vista, which if you haven't read it, you need to read it, because that's what we're having to comply with, is the test of whether it's a windfall profit. So the cases in the 70s they're not windfall profits, because it's clear that development rights had no value then, and even if they had value, they didn't in the districts where so many of our cases are, right? There were no hotels being built in those areas. So, okay. Interesting.
Move on? Item number 17, 2-10BZ, 224 Second Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, sorry. All right, we have proof of service of initial application and notice of hearing to officials. community board waived its right to a recommendation. This application is really the first step in a larger project and is submitted to enable the expansion of the zoning lot to facilitate the further development of the community facility. It doesn't really invoke Bella Vista because it's a not-for-profit, and no financials were involved with a not-for-profit, and the zoning lot merger would not have obviated the need for the rear yard equivalent waiver. So I don't, I think this is filed with an abundance of caution, even though Bella Vista sort of doesn't really get invoked in this kind of a case.
Right, wasn't this a special permit?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Right.
it wasn't even a full-on
Financial.
variance.
Right,
so-
right, and it was special permit, right.
Item number 18, 16313BZ, 133-10, 39th Avenue, Queens.
Okay, there are no notice requirements for extension of time to complete. I'd like to know what the status of the open violations are and why there's a stop work order and what needs to be done to fix it. I know the stop work was related to an earlier project, but it's still very much on the record, and I don't understand why. They need to pay the open fines for the ECB violation, and which requires the removal of illegal hardware at a fire exit. I hope that was done, because that's terrifying if this is an occupied building. Also, the approved drawings and BSA resolution were not included in the filing, so those need to be provided. That was quite curious that they're not provided. Anybody else on this one?
I'm just curious, what is holding them from, like, commencing the construction? They are talking about, in the statement of facts, says that as the owner was seeking alternatives to high-cost construction. So what is that?
Right.
And since they were granted this variance to 2018, I believe it's
2014 special permit.
yeah, it's, I'm sorry, special permit, not variance. Like 4 years, 5 years, they are just looking into alternatives to reach a cost-effective construction. It's kind of long time thinking, maybe.
That's slow thinking, yeah.
And what's gonna change if we, like, grant this, what's gonna change?
There has been a lot of site assemblages that's been going on in that area, and a lot of speculative site assembly with the hope of creating larger building footprints for construction. As a matter of fact, there's a site right next to it on College Point, a large parcel that's lying vacant, getting ready for construction. I'm just going to guess that there was a lot of speculation on this site as to whether they should be included in that development parcel or not. That's really where the value is.
Well, so if they're, those are always the things about intent to maintain the waiver versus, so,
It's just my speculation,
Yeah,
I
but-
don't have any information.
right, and this would only be the first extension, so, but it's a good question, why have you been waiting so long? Okay.
Okay.
Next.
Yes.
Appeals case decision items, item number 19, 2017-68A through 2017-96A. This is Teresi Loop and Frozen On Lane, Staten Island.
This is the one that I was talking about in the wrong order. So I was looking through the materials, and this is a site where the fire department was very adamant that there be no parking at all on the loop. And we don't have in our record, as far as I could see, a restrictive declaration for no parking. And as, I believe there's a restrictive declaration that's already recorded that's sort of about maintenance, but it's not, but it's mostly referring to the HOA. So in the interest of consistency with what we've been doing, where the restrictive deck is clear, there should be a restrictive deck that covers both the maintenance and is very, very clear about it, and the no parking requirement. And we have a lot of examples of those. So I know that this was mentioned in prior hearings, but it seems to have slipped through.
So we're reopening?
Yeah, we will need to reopen
We
to.
need to reopen, you know, we can just hand them some samples and they can copy the samples, but the HOA makes reference to maintenance, so they need to tie language in the HOA into the restrictive deck. I know that an argument was made that you shouldn't need a separate restrictive deck because there's already an HOA. It took me a long time to find the maintenance obligations, and that's why I prefer these two-page restrictive decks that nobody misses when they're looking at acquiring a piece of property. Everyone's on notice, super simple. Okay.
Item number 20, continued hearing items. Item number 20, 10215A, 1088 Rossville Avenue, Staten Island.
Rossville, okay. Sorry. The applicant, so we were basically ready to vote on this, and then the applicant said they were modifying the project. So the applicant revised the project to add extensions that don't sit in the bed of the map street. I just want to make sure, though, that the drawings are clear, that the addition is not located within the required side yard that's a minimum of 5 feet. There's no dimension, even though it visually looks like it complies, it needs to have a dimension there, so we know that it complies.
Any other comments?
Anybody else?
I think in this case, you're talking about required front yard.
No, side yard. The front yard, so it's sitting in, so,
Are you concerned about this?
no, the side yard here.
Here.
They made it, the enlargement is in, outside of the widening line. The house itself is existing, right? So, to the extent we waive front yard requirements, which is allowed, I don't know that it's actually necessary because it's an existing house, but the GCL 35 waiver includes waivers as if the front yard were relocated to the property line, basically. But I doubt that this house it's a non-conforming condition, non-compliant condition, so it wouldn't do us any good to waive it. They're going to have to go on the non-complying condition theory. Okay.
Move on.
Uh-huh.
Item number 21, 2016 4473A, 7274 East 3rd Street, Manhattan.
Okay. This site has, so we have additional letters of objection from neighbors in the building clarifying that they do object to the project because they didn't come to the hearing, so we didn't know what was going on. And they say in their letter that the condo board has not yet approved the project. We also have a letter from the condo board of managers stating that they want us to review the application prior to their agreeing to review the project in-house. So I kind of was battering back and forth about how we should proceed on this, and I was persuaded by our counsel that what we normally require, what we always require, is the letter of authorization from the property owner or the owner's representative saying, I give you the authority to make the application. We don't know unless they come that there's not let's say, not agreement on making the application in the corporation that owns the property or whatever it is, because God knows there are companies that have managers, and maybe one saying no, and the other one says yes, but meanwhile, we get the authorization, so we don't look behind that. So I was persuaded that we should just continue with this, and then, but to make very clear in our resolution that this in no way is an order on the part of the BSA to proceed with this work. However, if the penthouse is built, then it must comply with the following drawings, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So, with respect to the drawings, I didn't see indication, so they revise the drawings, but I didn't see indication that the walls of the fire stair will be lined with additional 2 layers of 5/8 inch gypsum board, which is the standard of what we request in the applications, unless the applicant can demonstrate that the existing construction is a minimum of 2 hours. I saw the detail on P11 that either represents actual knowledge or instead is simply an assumption that the sections through the corridor walls between the stair and the residential units, and the construction of the stair units are such, right? I'd like to know where this information is from. Did they bore a hole and figure it out? Or did they just assume that that's what's there? Because I know the walls of tenement buildings, they have sometimes horsehair, newspapers, there's all kinds of stuff in those walls. And unless you make a hole, you don't actually know what the construction class is. And also, you don't know what the construction is. And then how are you deciding whether that's a 2-hour rating? So that's done by a testing laboratory. So that's one reason why the board always requires 2 layers of 5/8 chipboard added, because that way we know we get 2 hours. The smoke detector and carbon monoxide detectors aren't shown on the drawings as being hardwired. They cannot be battery operated. They also need to demonstrate, as we did in another project, a much bigger one, but that the existing doors are fire rated, because they're saying existing fire rated doors to remain. They need to prove to us that they're 1.5 hours, and the way you do it is there's a label on the door. They need to photograph the label for every unit and show us that it's still a rated door, otherwise the door has to be replaced. It's the only way fire department accepts those doors. We discussed at the last hearing that the third door to the fire bulkhead, so the bulkhead, to the bulkhead, of this fire stair, is excessive or should be blocked or something. They never showed that door as swinging. It's just a panel on the fire stair. And we need to understand what that is. And if it's an operating door, then it should show as an operating door. If it's not, that should be blocked with concrete block. We also asked them to clarify at the last hearing, and we did ask about that third opening at the last hearing. We asked them to clarify at the last hearing the existing penthouse structure and all the existing door conditions on the BSA drawing. They did provide us with a set of the drawings for that penthouse, which clarifies to me when I'm looking at the drawings, but that now has to be imported onto the BSA drawings. What are those materials there? And where are the doors, actually, because it's not clear on the drawings what's a door, what's a wall. I also want to verify with the fire department, so I don't think they're here today, but that they are okay with the idea of climbing over this penthouse, or they have to climb up a ladder, over the roof of the penthouse and down the ladder in order to get to the rear or the front of the main roof.
That
And-
was a question I had raised last time.
Yes, correct.
And Chief Daly did say they were okay with it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that
So you
it just
want-
seems quite odd to me.
So you want the penthouse drawings all imported onto the BSA drawings that we're going to?
No, so the thing is, the existing penthouse that was installed prior to DOB's requirement that it was supposed to, coming here for MDL waiver, that prior penthouse has construction documents that were provided to us. The level of detail on the plan needs to be the same, so it's very clear, because when I look at the drawings, it looks like a lean-to, right? So then, what is that? It turns out it's actually a bedroom, and there's some kind of glazing that's actually a wall, and it's not depicted as a wall with glazing, it's depicted as a piece of sheet glass or something. So that I don't think that's accurate. So that they need to make that very clear, that there's this structure up there that's actually a structure that someone sleeps in. And also, and so the part of the verification for fire department is, I just want to hear one more time that they're okay with the idea of firemen coming up by a ladder onto the roof, walking not very far, like 10 feet or something, climbing up a ladder that it brings them up 10 feet or something to the roof of this penthouse, which is very narrow, climbing, which doesn't have a high parapet wall, so that's another thing, very low parapet, then coming across it and then down the ladder again in order to be to the back of the building where maybe they have to go fight a fire. I just find that quite strange, but that's fire department's domain. And also, I want them to look at the construction drawings for the existing penthouse bedroom, because now we have those construction drawings, just so that they can understand what the nature of that is, because it may be adding to concern about the fire safety of this building, because it wasn't built pursuant to any review by fire department, as far as I know. And the fire department should also look at the section detail of the subject penthouse, which is the area, which is on drawing P12, which is the section that shows the difference between the roof of the existing building and the floor of the penthouse, because sometimes they tell us that when the distance is too great, which it looks like, then they need sprinklering in there too, because it creates this microclimate where you can get spontaneous combustion and all sorts of scary things. Okay. They also should show the elevations of the roof levels at each building. They are different heights, because there's an access ladder from one roof to the other, and that's not clear at all, that you actually have to go down maybe 4 feet down a ladder to get to the other roof, and I would like the applicant to bring the architect so we can discuss these things with detail.
His plans are not signed and sealed, just FYI.
And the plans need to be signed and sealed. But they have to revise them anyway, but,
Yeah.
okay. Any other comments on this?
Item number 22, 2017-276A, 96 Industrial Loop.
Okay. I think we were only waiting for DEP, did we?
I reached out to DEP asking if they could do a conditional sign-off, and they said no. In order for them to sign off, there needs to be the certified site connection plan, and I've conveyed this to the applicant already.
Okay.
Zoning calendar decision items, item number 23, 218-4BZ, 2213 East 13th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, this was a kind of rapid turnaround where we asked that they reduce the floor area and reduce the slope of the attic. They did this, what I consider to be a barely perceptible change in the slope of the attic. I mean, you can see it if you kind of line up, compare the two drawings, then you match windows, and then you can see that it doesn't quite line up with that window, but it's such an imperceptible slope change, and the building height stays the same, and the floor area was barely affected by this. So I think, I don't know.
Maybe I wasn't clear. I think when I was asking for the slope to take place, I wasn't expecting the height to come down. It was more of from the front elevation and from the rear elevation, the building doesn't look like it's going straight up to 35 feet, but because the roof line will fall off so much that it would not be visible from the street line. And so though in the elevation, it would look in a straight two-face elevation, you would see it at 35 foot, but from a perspective at a street level, it won't be. And that's really that's why I had made that recommendation.
Right, I understood that.
Did
but-
their revision satisfy you on that point?
I was okay with it.
Okay.
Really? Okay.
And they could slope a little bit, but I think it's.
I just
the roof of
thought-
the height won't change. I just wanted to make that.
No,
clear.
no, I understood that, but I expected the slope, which was like this, to go down significantly. Instead, it was like this, and it went to this. It was like the least amount possible so that the slope is perceptible if you know. So I kind of I don't like those kinds of games when we're talking about changing the slope. It's to have a noticeable effect on the apparent massing of the building, and that didn't. And the other reason for doing it is the floor area is too high. And by increasing the slope, you'd put more of the portion of the attic that isn't really usable under a low ceiling, then you reduce the
Understood.
floor area. And they did so little.
So
Yeah.
you could ask a question. The reason I wasn't sure if they could make the slant of this roof even more, just structurally how that would work. That was not something I understood,
Well,
but that's a
Yeah.
question we can ask.
No, I mean, I looked at the section, and you could barely see any change at all in the section, so it's not a structural problem, it's head height over usable space versus not usable space. I just, it's sort of, this kind of thing drags out the hearings unnecessarily, and
Maybe it takes time to.
maybe, either that, or they come and they make a bigger slope. I'm looking at the,
It takes time to change it, so let's give him some more time so he can take it down.
right, maybe
This is
that.
set for decisions.
I know that. No, it was set for decision
On the condition.
on the condition that the slope was changed, but I look at it and I see no impact on the clearances. Therefore, hardly, they reduced the floor area by under 100 square feet. That was not the goal, right? So that, I find this game playing, and I really don't appreciate game playing like this. So, okay.
Continued here, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, yeah.
Continued hearing items, item number 24, 302 14BZ, 4504 Francis Lewis Boulevard, being administratively adjourned.
Okay, good. Because it's not in order here.
Item number 25, 2017-22HBZ, 131 66 40th Road, 131 68 40th Road, and 40-46 College Point Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, sorry, okay. In response to our concerns about disabled access from the cellar parking level, one elevator now extends into the cellar. Great. To meet the parking demand shortfall, 2 self-park spaces were also added to the first floor and 9 attended spaces to the cellar. The entry ramp, and so I just want to add that an approval would be conditioned on valet parking between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., Monday to Friday. They eliminated sort of this lunch hour. I think that's it's a little too nitpicky, so I think 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. is a clearer way to go. The entry ramp condition at the entrance was modified to bring the level change adjustment to the inside of the building and in a lobby. I think it's a much better solution from a pedestrian and urban design perspective, so the ramp, you don't see all this switchback ramp. I'm curious, though, from an interior design perspective, why the elevator located closest to the concierge, described as the greeter, doesn't just become the access elevator at the lower level, which takes the disabled and those with strollers and so on directly to their floors, since that elevator doesn't go to the cellar, so you could drop that floor down a little more over on that area. And the elevation change between the upper and the lower lobby is only 2 feet. The reason I'm mentioning the 2 feet is because of head clearance, but when you look at the cellar level, there isn't anything under there that would be affected if you continued to drop the floor adjacent to that elevator down by 2 feet. And a couple of reasons for doing that: the interior ramp crimps the main arrival point, both in front of the greeter and in front of the elevators. So you've got people coming in with kind of open flow, and then they get cramped down or crimped down to a place where it's almost like they're having to walk through like an 8-foot doorway until it opens up again in front of the elevator bank. That's kind of strange planning, and I don't really get why the elevator can't just stop 2 feet lower and then you move the greeter to the other side of that lobby enclosure. The applicant submitted approved ZRD1 and CCD1s, which they got in record time, indicating compliance with Article 6, Chapter 4 of the zoning resolution and Appendix G of the building code. The EAS needed to be updated, was it?
We got a draft sign-off from DOT, and that's being reviewed today. And I think based on that, they'll have to submit a final EAS.
Yeah, okay, right. I saw the conditional sign-off with respect to pedestrian and traffic impacts.
Yeah.
And I just want to make a note to our council, it's conditional, so the conditions should be included in our resolution. Do you want me to read them?
Sure.
Okay, so it says, to be consistent with the trip generation methodology, which is based on number of trips per 1,000 gross square feet, the applicant has agreed to undertake a post-occupancy trip generation study approximately 1 year after the facility is in operation. The following will be in the resolution. They want us to put this in the resolution. The applicant has agreed to conduct a travel demand and modal split survey in the same manner as what was conducted at the 37th Avenue location to document the new facility's trip-making characteristics. The applicant will compare the survey results with the calculated trip-making factors with the EAS projections. DOT will review the results and validate the EAS conclusions regarding the pedestrian and vehicle trip generation. Should the survey results exceed the EAS projections, DOT will require the applicant to perform a traffic and/or pedestrian loss of service analysis. Level of service analysis. At select locations / pedestrian elements. The applicant will identify traffic and/or pedestrian improvements for DOT's review and approval.
So these are under review today by the supervisors.
Okay, so
By DOT.
conditional.
Yeah.
So it's no matter what, the approval would be conditioned on these elements, but the question is that an approval, it's not an approval letter yet, it's a draft of an approval letter. Yeah,
And the applicant has agreed to this
Okay.
condition.
good. Any other comments on this? No? Okay.
Item number 20, move on? Yes. Item number 26, 2017-247BZ, 1367 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, demolition plans were provided, but something was wrong with the layers or the PDF, since you actually can't read which are dashed lines and which are solid lines. And so I actually can't tell what's being removed. It looks like either everything's dashed or everything's solid. And on the second and attic floors, the lines have dropped off of the to be retained drawing, so you only see one line and you don't know what you're looking at. There's also 10 feet of wall to be retained on the interior that doesn't count, but it isn't shown on the drawings. And if I compare the demolition exterior wall retention drawings to the proposed, I don't see how the rear wall is being maintained at the exterior as claimed. The only retained wall on the exterior is the northern side wall. No joists are shown remaining on the second and attic levels, although they are being used to count remaining floor area. You have to have joists and walls in order to have floor area. And I didn't see any effort to reduce the massing as was requested at the prior hearing. I actually didn't see any change to the drawings at all. So the architect needs to come to this hearing. Any other comments?
Item number 27, 2016-4171BZ, 823 Kent Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, we last heard this in November of 2017. According to the applicant, they have come to an agreement with the fire department about how to address the frontage issue here by providing sprinkler installation at the back building. An 8-foot driveway is being provided alongside the front building, leaving room for a 17-foot wide front building that's the subject of this application. We need fire department's comments on this because it was just the say-so of the applicant. If fire department is okay with that solution, then we need to time the installation of the sprinklers in the back building. I'm recommending that the installation be done prior to permit of the front building for a lot of reasons, because it's maybe arguably harder to get the plumber to work back there when the access of a plumber's truck is more restricted, because it's only an 8-foot wide driveway, right? And other types of access by workers, right? And also, because we know that if we required it prior to C of O, many buildings are occupied without a C of O, right? And because it's so critical to life safety, I don't think it should be allowed to be occupied even surreptitiously, right? The proposal is for 3 2-bedroom units, one on each floor, where the fire stair becomes part of the 3rd floor duplex unit and doesn't have egress to the roof for fire department access, and there is no access to the penthouse roof. My experience, and I think we may have talked about this in another application, but my experience with 3-family multiple dwellings is the fire stair has to continue to the roof in new buildings. Fire department should comment on this, but also we need the architect to show us the section in the building code and the multiple dwelling law that allows this. Apparently, according to the app, let's say the owner's representative, the architect says that the project complies with the multiple dwelling law, but it's not as if we found a letter signed and sealed from the architect to that effect. At the last hearing, we asked that the balconies be removed that extend over the street line, and that the cellar areaway be removed from the sidewalk. That wasn't, neither of those things were done. They did reduce the depth of the balconies, but I don't think the balcony should be extending over a city street. The second floor, they treated it with like a Juliet balcony. I think that's what they should do here. The streetscape indicates the building next door at 825 Kent is 37 feet high, but it's 3 stories tall, so that didn't really make sense. So I'm trying to understand, is that a measurement to the top of a penthouse that we just don't see in the photograph? And with respect to the stair bulkhead on the subject site, since you don't need the full height clearance, I think the bulkhead should follow the slope of the stairs so that it's less visible from the street, because it's right up in your face. And just for the architect's information, when you do a street visibility line, you don't draw it from right under the building. You go across the street and stand on the sidewalk across the street. So they have actually a person standing 10 feet away from the building and looking straight up. You cannot see anything when you look straight up, ever. So, also, a 4-foot high fence is shown outside of the property line on the sidewalk. So I'd like to understand if there's an existing revocable consent. We talked about this at the last hearing for this, or is some kind of grandparented condition. I see the neighbors have the same fence on either side, but I'm not sure what gives them the right other than longstanding use of it. The neighbor on one side is a newer building, but that might be a renovation and not new construction. I don't know. So those were my comments. Anybody else?
I had financial comments, and I just wanted to say that all of my questions were basically addressed. I had questions about the first floor apartment and how it really was the same size as the apartments above and should be made a second floor, two-bedroom apartment, and they did that. However, they just need to correct one thing, which is page 7 says one-bedroom apartment on the ground floor, and that's the financial statement. But they did make the corrections to the pricing for the site value. I had made a comment about them taking into account the condition of the comparables, and they basically said that they had no interior access to any of those homes, so they couldn't. However, they did make an upwards adjustment of 5% for the excess land of the subject, and then they talked about how they valued that home as part of the variance grant, because the price of the home then goes down, and the reason why is that it has less land available to it privately, because now you have the home in front, and I found that was true. So the apartment comparables in general, they're all valued as if they're two-bedroom, one-bathroom, and the comparables are similar size to it, and they increase the income on the first floor to $3,060 a month. The second floor is $3,400 a month. And I had raised a question about the third floor apartment being slightly low because it's a duplex, and they basically pointed to the fact that there is a comparable that they used in an elevator building on the top floor, which is a superior from the photo, superior to what they're going to provide here, that was at $4,500 a month, and so they felt that $4,250 was appropriately valued, and I agree after looking at those photos.
Not an elevator building. Right.
Exactly. They addressed what was included in the as-of-right costing that had brought it up higher than the construction cost of the proposed, as in the cost to cantilever over the access way to the rear home and the structural steel and masonry to support the heavier loads, and the elevator for the movement of goods and equipment up and down that aren't present in the home. Still in all, everything was revised, and the as-of-right is now $237 a square foot versus the proposed residential, which is $257 a square foot.
I don't think there's still a cantilever.
In the as-of-right?
Oh, in the as-of-right.
Yeah,
Oh,
the
oh, sorry,
as-of-right.
sorry,
No, I was
sorry.
talking about the
Okay, yeah,
as-of-right.
yeah, okay.
So I found that acceptable, so I'm saying the financials are fine right
Okay.
now.
Great.
Oh, also, we received the new EAS, but it's unclear what the EAS was responding to, because we still have comments in November on air quality and hazmat. We reached out, but haven't.
Okay.
Vice Chair, did you have something?
No, sorry, I didn't.
Okay. Move on? Yep.
Item number 28, 2016 4468BZ, 27 East 61st Street, Manhattan.
The proposal was reduced as instructed to 5.4 FAR and 8,137 square feet of commercial floor area, reduced from the original proposal of 6 FAR and 9,037 square feet, which would be a 1.4 FAR increase. Sorry, not correct. A 0.4 FAR increase over the allowable, right? It's a 5 FAR allowable? Now I'm confused, but anyway, okay. It's an increase over the allowable by some amount. It's
4 FAR is
4, okay,
for
it's
commercial.
1.4, okay. The revised proposal also provides a 30-foot setback from the rear lot line at the 5th and 6th floors, all of which, including the floor area and the setback, is the same bulk as DOB approved in the plans for a mixed-use building with residential above. So the form of the building isn't changing as the form as approved by DOB. It's just the use inside that's changing. And that's what we discussed at the last hearing as being the minimum variance. So, anybody else?
I was satisfied with that. I don't know the financial. Do you have any
They
comments?
adjusted their financials and adjusted the rents upwards and provided me a couple of additional comparables that were actually just off Madison Avenue to show how the rents dramatically fell off. So then I was accepting of their statement. So I'm fine.
Any other comments?
Item number 29, 2017-298 BZ, 14 White Street, Manhattan.
Okay. I mean, basically, most of the discussion was going to be about engineering and financials, which I will leave to Commissioners Hartley Brown and Sheta, or the other way around. I do want to make one comment about the tripling of the cost of the linear cost of drilled caissons from $90 to $300 per linear foot due to what was described as clear error by the applicant. That's an enormous cost shift, and such enormous shifts that serve to compensate for cost reductions that are required by the board never sit well with us. And if the applicant would just look at some applications that the board ultimately denied because of shifting losses or shifting numbers that were due to clearly erroneous error on the part of the applicant, they would avoid doing that at all costs, right? You'd have to say, here it's the applicant and the applicant's consultants. Why in the world would they submit something that was clearly erroneous? So I hope they reconsider that tripling of those costs. Fire department appears to have a problem with the proposed automated parking system and requested more information on it. We reached out to fire department, not only in connection with this application, but with another one with a much bigger system. And apparently, fire department is reviewing many of these automated systems.
Did you see the email from this morning?
From this morning, no.
Oh, it's not this one?
not-
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I apologize.
that's on the bigger one.
They didn't provide the information that the NY requested.
Right. I'm aware that, that you have to submit a lot of information in order to get approvals on this, but what the issue with all of these parking systems is whether fire department will even allow the system that's assumed, right? And if we don't, let's just say for argument's sake, we were okay with this seven space system. Fire department needs to be okay with it before we could include it in this material, just for argument's sake. So, and I'm trying to understand this lesser variance scenario that was submitted now. It's called the lesser parking scenario with 2 parking spaces in the automated system. So what they did with the space that they retrieved from the by not having 7 spaces on the second floor is they turned that into a rec room. I find that not only incredible, but laughable. Because seriously, so, and instead of adding 2 more bedrooms or even maybe more than that, and also okay, that's first. I'm just incredulous that they would have the nerve to show that as a rec room. Also, I'd like to know why the floor areas deductions are so different between the lesser parking scenario and the proposed. If you just compare the deductions at each floor, they're different for no reason at all. There's also an error on the first floor plan in terms of the designation of retail versus residential areas. So, and because it's a mistake in the designation, I'm wondering whether that mistake in designation was picked up in the floor area calculations and the cost analyses. Because the cost estimator, is neutral on whether that's residential or retail space. He just sees it and then starts doing the math on it, right? And didn't we also ask for a lesser variance with 0 parking, so that you don't have this parking mechanism? Much of this application is being compared to the Franklin Street project that is a double triangle adjacent to the subway that the board approved last year. I note that the waivers requested there were very minimal in scale, considering that lot really is an impossible lot. They requested lot coverage, and when I say minimal, it's because they're not perceptible waivers. So they were lot coverage, height and setback, street wall location, and open area obstructions. There was no request for an increase in floor area. Here, the request is for a street wall waiver, which from a design perspective, I can understand, though it probably isn't essential, and a 1 or 1.02 FAR increase, which is a much more significant waiver than at Franklin for a much less beleaguered site. And of course, I'm not at all convinced about the need for a parking waiver to make this project feasible given what you have to give up to accommodate it. So the parking then is also, interestingly, being used to further reduce the zoning floor area at the first and second floors. So actually, the building has more gross floor area because of it. So they need the parking to make the building even bigger. When you look at it that way, the parking waiver would give them more than 1,000 square foot boost in zoning floor area beyond the allowable. So the requested increase in floor area is actually higher. Effectively, there is a waiver to add a 7th and an 8th floor to an as-of-right 6-story building. So that's a very, very perceptible waiver, independent of whether you allow the setbacks to be waived. However, I do agree that a triangular site imposes more surface area for the facade, but not particularly in this case, that the configuration of the site is a detractor in terms of sale value, since the prow, what I call the prow of the triangle, is actually advantageous to layouts, in particular where they chamfer the apex as they're proposing to do here with the waiver. So it actually makes for quite dramatic apartments, actually, when you sit at one end of the living room and you can kind of look down the end to see the boat, the prow of the boat. The materials provided never addressed our concerns about residential units being located adjacent to and above a gigantic parking elevator system, nor do the cost estimates isolate the additional costs to construct the 2- and 7-car systems. It isn't only about the cost of the system itself, like buying that mechanism, but the core that's built around it, the insulation from vibration and noise, the mechanical exhaust systems. There's a lot that goes into building a parking in the middle of a residential unit. And not to mention the structure for the core walls that are needed. So you're effectively building another elevator shaft. That's different from the system. And we asked them at the last hearing, isolate those costs. Let's see how much it's actually costing to build the elevator and the parking system, and they didn't do it. With respect to the as-of-right, it still isn't laid out to match the lesser variance scenario. For example, the lobby configuration of the as-of-right cuts into the retail more significantly than it does in the lesser and the proposed. And in the as-of-right, the 2nd to 5th floors, there are 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units per floor, while in the lesser variance, there are 1-bedrooms with the corner cut off for a terrace, and at the second floor, at the cutoff for a terrace at the second floor, and at the 3rd to 5th floors, 2 bedrooms are provided, plus very awkward 3 bedrooms with these long, skinny living rooms. So I first asked, how can we make a fair comparison between the value of the units if they're different for no apparent reason? We discussed all this at the last hearing. And the second thing I want to say is that the as-of-right layouts are much better than the proposed. Much more spacious, much better location of bedrooms versus living room and so on. So those are my comments.
I agree with your comments. I'm concerned concerned that we did not get the information with regards to the lesser variance with zero parking and separating out the cost associated with a parking structure, its maintenance, operation, and license, all of the liabilities that are associated with it. I agree with you on the recreation. When I saw that plan, I said, oh, so why isn't this another bedroom? So if they want to justify that the rec room is more valuable and adds to the value, then there needs to be a separate financial analysis. I leave that to Commissioner Harley Brown to say that I would like to see how an additional 2 bedrooms on that floor is less revenue generating than a rec room that will add to the overall value of the.
Well, they actually aren't even addressing whether or not the recreation area is adding value to the property. But I just want to say that if we ask for something and we don't get it, do we really have to sit there and ask again and again? Why can't, because where we're all leaning with this is get rid of the parking.
Right.
And we're not convinced that it is one of those, it could be parking, it could be this, it doesn't really impact the costs. We're not really convinced by that argument, and we don't see that the parking is necessarily adding all the value that it could, because even to this day, they're still undervaluing the parking. And when you look at all of the comparables for the different apartments, very few of those buildings have parking as an amenity, which leads me to believe that perhaps it's not true what they've been saying, that parking is so essential at this price point, because many other properties don't have it, and they're still selling their apartments at quite a high value. So why don't we just, instead of going back and forth in the interest of time, just say, we don't want parking here?
Yes.
Redesign.
That makes it a lot easier, yes.
It's not just parking, it's parking and other things.
Well, you get to the other
I'm
things.
going to you after
We
that.
we ask it for a ton of things, and I believe we shouldn't talk about lesser variance for now. We should just step back a little bit and look at the bigger picture. The entire hardship for this project is hung on the following: the shape, the TA, and the associated subsurface with the TA and the need for the piles, etc. So during the last hearing, we asked them to provide us with some clarifications on cost items. We got some explanations. I'll go over them in a second. And we did ask for details on the construction cost estimate, how the quantities were reached. We got nothing on that, nothing. And I would say we got nothing from McLaughlin in like all the projects that we asked them to provide us with, how they come up with the magic numbers that they just put in the construction cost estimate. And this is not good. Review-wise, I'll go over some items. I'll go over the site shape. I'll go over the construction cost estimate. I'll go over the cost related to the vibration monitoring required by the TMA, foundation system, the comparison. On this, I'm glad that they submitted this comparison. Again, my look at a variance that's based on hardship because of subsurface or whatever is to get 2 sites, one typical site, one actual site, look at how much the physical conditions, the unique physical conditions are causing as a hardship, how much money is caused by this hardship, and then translate this how much money into whatever, floor area, reduction in yards, whatever. And then quantify, that's how we should get to the lesser variance. And since this how much, we're not agreed upon it yet, I believe we don't have to talk about the lesser variance for now. We're not there yet. And after that, I'll go to the letter from the structural engineer talking about the structural system, the groundwater, the need for the piles, and then the vibration isolation report by Getzner. Like, big, bold font, we need the structural, the geotechnical, and I need whoever from Getzner prepared this report for the need of vibration isolation thing to be present tomorrow. I have tons of issues I need to discuss with them. And then let's go over the comments. Number one, side shape. They are claiming that the facade footprint, the square footage, will increase if they assume two sides. One typical side, same footprint, of course, it's 100 by 38, versus the actual side, which is near rectangular, 119 over 100 by 70 over 7. And based on the comparison of these two sides.
Rectangular or triangular?
The first side was rectangular.
Rectangular.
Yes, I'm sorry if I said triangular. And the other one was near triangular. It's trapezoidal side. 70 over 7 and 119 over 100.
Right.
And they came up with 25 square footage increase in the facade. You know what? I'm an engineer, I look at it like this. Look at the perimeter. The perimeter of the first lot is about 280. The second one is 290. If the two buildings are comparable in the height, why would the facade be different by 2,300 square foot? If you just have 10 feet difference or 15 feet difference in the perimeter and the same building height, the facade should be the same. I believe this is just made up. The 25 square footage difference in the facade, this is just a made-up number. And the unit price for this even is $168 per square foot. So it's like they are implying that in order for us to finish this facade, every square foot is gonna cost us about $170. Maybe they're gonna glue it with gold, I'm not sure, but this is the number that they submitted. Also, they are saying that they will lose square footage for each floor, 21.6 square foot per floor because of the perimeter wall. I'm not sure if we should account for, if you have a triangular site, you will have a perimeter wall. If you have a rectangular site, you will have a perimeter wall. If you have a circular site, you will have a perimeter wall. And the perimeter wall they considered here is 18 inch or 14 inch. 14 inch over the entire height of the building. I don't know why. The structural system is flat plate on columns. Why would you need 14 inch perimeter wall over the entire height? It's not acceptable. Then the construction cost estimate, still no explanations on the quantities, just numbers. And some quantities, and the reason we're asking the construction cost estimator to give us details on this, we're not just giving him hard time. When he mentioned to me that the quantity of the excavation is 4,000 cubic yard, let's say, or on this project, I believe he's talking about 2,700 cubic yard. And I look at the footprint of the site and I multiply it by the excavation depth, and I get just 1,900 cubic yard versus the number he's given me in the construction cost estimate, the difference 35%. Maybe he's right and I'm wrong. I want to understand, how did you get this number? So explain it to me. I'm not saying your number is wrong. I'm saying just explain it. Convince me that the number you put in your construction cost estimate is legit. Otherwise, if you do not provide me with these explanations, I will consider it's not, and it's incorrect. Right now, I see 35% extra over what it should be. So if you want to convince me that, no, it's not, please provide explanations. The pumping cost, and I understand that the response letter to our comments, our previous hearing comments, did talk about this. There is 150 grand for pumping cost. And I did look at it last hearing, like the typical from the construction cost estimator. Pumping means pumping. It's groundwater pumping. But when you look at the geotech report, it says no groundwater dewatering, no significant groundwater dewatering will be needed, because simply the groundwater is at about 15 feet below grade and they are not excavating that deep. And all of a sudden, the explanation come not from the geotechnical engineer, not from the cost estimator, but from the attorney in the response. Oh, this is not the pumping you understood. This is not the pumping for the groundwater. This is the pumping for the concrete. You know what? My response is two things. Number one, this is the pumping for the groundwater. It cannot be the pumping for the concrete. You know why? Because pumping for concrete costs about $1,000 to $1,500 per day. If you're claiming $150,000 for pumping concrete, that means that you're gonna pump concrete every day, which is not possible. You should have spoken to the construction cost estimator first, and then drafted your response. But providing a response like this to the board, I don't get it. I'm not sure how come they put an explanation like this. But this is not a pumping for concrete, period. It cannot be $150,000. And and in addition to this, the concrete cost unit price, the unit price for the concrete, it's $1,000 per cubic yard. I would invite all the commissioners to look at just the previous hearing construction cost estimate. Look at the foundation concrete unit price. It's on the order of $600 per cubic yard. And it's not even a mat foundation. This one, they are claiming that they're gonna use mat foundation, and the unit price is $1,000, 40% more than the 600, even maybe more than 40%. And you know what? This is excluding the pumping cost, because the pumping cost is the $150,000. So I look at this like, this is amazing. So the construction cost items for the TA monitoring, the vibration monitoring, all these kind of items, I didn't get explanation from the construction cost estimator, but I got some explanations from the attorney and the geotechnical engineer. So I'll come to these in a minute. But the underpinning thing, I spoke about the underpinning last hearing, and I said, if you have underpinning, give me the adjacent building conditions so I can see if you need underpinning or not. And in the response letter from the attorney, he said underpinning is out. It's still there. The underpinning item is still there.
But if you look at the drawings, they're using step footings.
I didn't look at the structural drawing. We don't have underpinning drawings, nor excavation support drawings. We don't have that.
Okay.
But my point is, underpinning was there last hearing. We said, okay, give us the adjacent building conditions to see whether you need underpinning or not. In this submission, the letter came, there is no underpinning, we took it out. If you look at the financial documents, the comparison between typical and actual, it has underpinning. Yes, I understand that the cost on the typical is the same as the cost on the actual. So the cost premium claimed is nothing. But don't forget, it's still there in whatever proposed scenario, you still have the underpinning in play. And when we're gonna quantify the lesser variance, we're not just gonna consider the cost premium, the increase in cost because of the physical conditions. We're gonna consider the ratio of this increased cost to the cost of the total scope of the entire cost of that proposed scenario. So if you wanna remove the underpinning entirely, remove it from the comparison and remove it from the original scope too. If you said I removed it, please remove it. The second item is the cost related to the vibration monitoring and the requirements of the TA. I saw that about $250,000 was claimed as hardship because the project is adjacent to the TA. These costs include the cost of seismograph installation, monitoring, and other costs that is caused by the adjacency to the TA. I need the geotechnical engineer to walk me through the breakdown of this 250,000, because right now, I'm not swallowing this huge number. So the geotechnical engineer should show up and explain to me where from they got this number. This is not the cost estimator. My assumption is that the construction cost estimator got this number from a guy who knows what he's doing, from the geotechnical engineer. So the geotechnical, instead of like back and forth and wasting time, the geotechnical engineer is more than welcome to show up tomorrow and explain this number to us. And if he convinces me, of course, I'll take it. Now let's go to the big story, the caissons, the foundation system. The previous submission said we need caissons, 400 ton each. And we need 33 caissons. That was mentioned in this current submission. So 33 piles, caisson type piles. The one pile can hold up to 400 tons. Last hearing, I said why caissons are the most expensive pile option. Why do you need caissons? This is a 5-story, 6-story building. You could look into a cheaper option. And the geotechnical engineer responded, we considered what's called mini piles. Mini pile, the difference between caisson and mini piles is caisson you should drill until you hit rock, and all this drilling is just useless. It doesn't give you any pile capacity, any hold-up capacity. It gives you nothing. The only resistance for that pile you get when you drill into the rock and you socket this pile into rock. And that's what they are willing to go with. I'm an old school guy. Micro pile is when you drill through the overburden, the sand, the clay, the gravel, whatever, you could use this good material to provide you some capacity. When we go to caissons, we have like really tall buildings. The column loads are huge. So you need high capacity pile. So you go to that caisson option because it's a tall building. So you pay for that caisson because you need it. But this is a 5-story building. I assume, or 6-story building, or even 10-story building. I assume that the building, the column loads are tiny. So if the pile is capacity is not 400 ton, even if it's much less, you could live with that. You still can use mini pile to support this. And I'm not just speculating on this. The geotechnical engineer in his own submission mentioned that he evaluated the mini pile and he found that the capacity of a mini pile would be on the order of 150 tons. Beautiful. 150, you know what? Even if I take in the structural and engineering world, the way we preliminary check on the foundation system that we're gonna use is this. Get the entire building weight and divide it by the footprint. If that gives you something like a tiny number, the ground can take it, you go shallow foundation. If the ground cannot take it, you need deep foundation system, piles. To evaluate which pile option you will need, mini pile, drilled pile, driven pile, caisson pile, you would take that total load and let's say, okay, I want to use mini piles. A mini pile is 150 ton, total building weight divided by 150 ton. Oh, we need 3 million piles. No, this pile option is not good because the number of piles is too large. So I don't want to wait until I drill 3 million piles. So let's go another pile with higher capacity. This is the way structural and geotechnical engineers think about it. Now, if I take the entire building weight and I divide it by 150 ton, it's giving me, guess what? It's giving me like 50% of the 33 caissons. So they are claiming 33 caissons, 400 ton each. And I may be wrong, but I'm coming up with about 17 piles, mini piles, and the capacity is 150. Guess what? You're good with my mini piles, you could use it. If I'm not wrong, if you believe I'm wrong, show up tomorrow and again, prove me wrong, and I'll be happy. But this is just like heads up. And you know that the reason for going to the piles here is not because of bad ground. This site, if it's not adjacent to a TA, could be founded on mat foundation. We could put the foundation for this building as mat foundation. But they are saying when they put the mat foundation, it's gonna compress the ground and it's gonna push against the tunnel. I did design a 67-story building, 3 feet away of a subway tunnel very similar to this. The address is 138 Willoughby Street. We designed this on a mat foundation, supported on grade, and on what we call it ground improvement elements. When we put building on piles, the building load is not filled through the ground. It's filled by the piles. It's like when you put something on this table, the table is feeling the load, but when you put like a pin underneath that thing, the table is not gonna be feeling anything. The entire load will be taken by that pin or pile. Use the ground capacity. You got good ground. You could utilize this ground capacity and just put some ground improvement elements. If you are serious to like optimize the cost of this foundation system, but I don't see that they are willing to do that. Like exaggerating on the cost side for the foundation system, I believe this is the approach they are going right now. So if you want to explore this.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
I think as I was reading the difference between the mini pile versus the caisson and the cost differences, they also cited that per DOB code, there are some stricter requirements for mini piles than for caisson, and that New York City, if you're using mini pile or mini caisson, New York City the transit would require a foundation within 30 to 35 feet of the subway tunnel, which adds to the cost. So I'm just kind of citing that, and that was another reason why they're
the
proposing
TA care about
caisson.
one thing. The TA cares about one thing. I believe you're mixing two things. They talked about the DOB and the TA. When it comes to the TA says, do not put a building on shallow foundation that bears on the ground next to a tunnel. Why? Because imagine that you're next to a tunnel or you're standing, when you push the ground down, the ground push the tunnel lateral. The TA doesn't want to have that. So the TA says, put piles underneath that building so the ground doesn't feel any extra load because of your building.
The tunnel.
Again, any extra load because of your building. Now, the way I think about it, the way I've done it before, let's say the top of the tunnel is 15 feet deep. Right now, you have soil overburden over there from that top of the tunnel to the ground. When you're gonna build this building, you will take this and throw it away, right? This is low. So the building you put back, the building you're gonna construct, you could use the capacity that overburden way. You could have like a mat foundation that put this load back on the ground at the top of the tunnel. By doing this, you're not imposing any extra load on that tunnel structure. But if your building is heavier than that, it's gonna put more load, then you have to put piles to pick the extra load. That's what we call it pile shallow foundation. We call it pile draft in the engineering world. If you look at it that way, instead of going with caissons, which in my opinion is a crazy option, even mini piles, you could avoid the mini piles and build what we call it ground improvement elements. They are like really cheap pile elements or ground improvement elements that they pick the difference between the actual building load and what the tunnel can take. This application is way far from that. It's the other extreme. It's no. We don't want to put anything in grade. We're going to take everything on piles, and you know what? We're not going to use the pile capacity that we need exactly. We're going to use a pile capacity that's 3 times than what we need. 3 times what we need. So it's right now the pile option is a scary option cost-wise because it's a 400 versus probably 100 ton. So the cost is very exaggerated.
Okay.
So this is for the pile foundation, the foundation system thing. structural engineer and the geotechnical engineer should explain to us why a mini pile cannot be used if, per the geotechnical engineer, a mini pile capacity could be 150 ton. So if they eliminate the caissons, use 150 ton, why not? This is my question. The next point is the comparison.
And I just want to interject one thing. The reason for this is so that you're not designing their system.
No.
The issue is that if the system they're choosing is the expensive way to go, we're looking at what is a cost-effective way of building a building that you're not trying to build super high-end and all of this sort of stuff. And if you opt to go with a much more expensive system, go right ahead, but you can't use that as part of the criteria for the hardship.
Yes, and
That's the issue.
yes, and I usually explain this, if you have a footing that need 100 ton pile, and you want to use 500 ton pile, if you go to the DOB, they will probably bring you a coffee and say thank you because you provided more safety. You come to us, we're not going to do the same. We're going to say, no, use the 100. Use exactly what you're looking for, because
The
your
cost.
hardship,
For
if the
cost.
cost is based on that.
Yes.
So I'm not telling him how to design the building, I'm just saying the cost hardship should be whatever you need, nothing more.
Okay.
For the comparison between the typical site and the actual site, the comparison included TA engineering. Again, I need explanation on that. And by the way, the last submission was 75 grand for the MTA engineering. This submission, it went down to 50 grand. I didn't hear from TA that they offer discount for people, 33% discount or something for the coming construction. So why went down from 75 to 50? We're not negotiating here. Give me the number. I want to know how much it costs. What is the cost for the TA engineering? So 50 grand, 75, convince me it's 75, and you know what? Change it back to 75. I'll take it. The concrete pumping, I spoke about that. The 150,000 is not for concrete pumping, period. It's for pumping, and it's for pumping groundwater, and it's not needed. They should consider 2.5, they consider 2.5 thick foot mat foundation for the typical, which is good, but I believe that for the typical side, they consider 2.5 mat, and pile caps, so consider 2.5, typical, yeah. For the actual site conditions, I see that they are still talking about mat foundation. For the actual conditions, we're gonna use piles. So just use tiny pile caps and put concrete slab on top of these pile caps. You're gonna have to use 2.5 thick mat foundation and pile foundation in the meantime. Just tiny pile caps. If you have single pile cap or 2 piles per cap, you don't need to put mat foundation for that building. And if you're gonna talk about the design for against hydrostatic pressure, because one of the things that they are talking about, if you wanna put slab on grade without reinforcement, which is $8.5 per square foot, it costs almost nothing compared to 2.5 feet thick mat foundation. We are talking about, that groundwater, and when it rains, it's gonna be hydrostatic pressure acting on that slab from the bottom, so it could leak. I would say this, the geotechnical engineer said groundwater is 15 feet below grade, almost. He said that the design groundwater table should be 5 feet above that. I agree, that's generous. 5 feet above what is monitored is more than generous. Put your cellar slab, put it 10 feet below grade. You don't need more than that, 10 feet below grade. Put your cellar slab there. You don't have to design for any hydrostatic pressure. And you know what? Put a slab on grade, unreinforced, and you're done for the day. So instead
Another
of-
reason for not having parking down there.
Parking could be done with a slab on grade or with 10 feet thick mat. For parking, it doesn't matter. The ground can take it. But what I'm saying, they are considering piles, and what type of piles? Caissons, the most expensive. And in addition to this, 2.5 feet, 30-inch thick mat foundation. You don't need that. Just put the slab, the cellular slab at the right depth, and you're done with the dewatering, you're done with the hydrostatic pressure. You don't need to bother about all these items. And again, the underpinning thing, the underpinning still exists, and
Yeah,
that,
their cellar is on, water table says it's at minus 13.6, and their cellar is above that. So,
when you get a groundwater table from the geotechnical engineer, actually you get two things. You get what we call monitored groundwater. When they do the borings and they put the monitoring well, they monitor the groundwater and they say, okay, we found it at 15 feet, let's say. And then the geotechnical engineer, writing his recommendation, says, you know what? Don't design for 15 feet below grade. Design for just 10, because if you get some rain, if you get some flooding,
Right.
it's gonna go up.
Right.
That's what they said. They said we monitored the groundwater at 8 inches, almost 15 feet, but designed for this elevation, which is about 10 feet below grade.
but the top of their slab is 10 foot 11 inches.
Yeah.
So the bottom is, whatever it is, minus a foot and a half.
Yeah, they dig in deeper because it's thicker. Then they are closer to the groundwater. Then they need to design for the hydrostatic pressure. That's why they are going with 2.5 feet thick mat foundation. But if you take it higher, 1 foot up will make it in that safe zone. It's not going to be any hydrostatic pressure. And in addition to this, excavation-wise and dewatering-wise, you don't need to do anything. You're in the dry zone. You could just excavate, put your foundation in, and you're done. The Selman's report or letter, they talked about a mat foundation for typical to avoid low-quality soils and should be minimum 2.5 feet thick. I would say it should be 3 feet. This is for the typical. So it raises the cost for the typical case. So it reduces the cost premium, the difference between the typical and the actual. So I wouldn't say it's 2.5 feet. I would say it's 3 feet because the subsurface conditions are not that great. So if they make it 3 feet, I would be fine with that. For the actual side, they said they need 18-inch thick mat foundation. I don't know why it's 18-inch thick and it's mat foundation. Like I said, raise the cellar floor like a foot. Use a slab on grade unreinforced. And even if you want to use reinforced slab, it's going to be 18-inch or so. And they said vibration isolation is needed. Vibration isolation report is provided by Getzner. The cost premium is about $300,000 was claimed. And I did read the report, and I'm not sure if whoever prepared the report understands that this building is going to be founded on pile foundation. This building is not going to be bearing on grade. The loads are taken by pile foundation. Again, I would like whoever prepared the report to listen to these words and think about them. And if he still insists, after what I said, that this system, the vibration isolation system is needed, please, I need you to be here tomorrow. Explain to me what kind of system you're using and what is the model that you consider to come up with this system. Right now, the model you put in the report is not clear. I did read the report like 3 times and I wasn't able to come up with solid understanding for that. So, yeah, we need a breakdown for the $307,000 for the isolation system, explanation for what kind of system is this and why it's needed. If you do not change your mind based on what I just said. This building is founded on piles. It's not founded on like soil subgrade. So if it is on soil subgrade, when the subway comes, I went to the site before the weekend, and I waited there until 2 or 3 subways passed by. I couldn't feel like I'm shaking. It wasn't the case. And even if this is gonna be the case, if this building is founded on grade, if it's like this computer on that table and I vibrate this table, the computer would vibrate. But if I have a hole in the table and I have somebody holding the computer from underneath and I shake that table, that guy is not gonna shake because it's held by somebody else. So I don't know why that Githner thinks that they need vibration isolation system. And the system is kind of like amazing. So I wasn't able to understand what kind of system is this. So we need to get explanations on that. So please, do not waste our time tomorrow. Geotechnical engineer, structural engineer, and Githner should be here to like educate us on these numbers.
Okay, great, thank you, thank you. Do you have more?
I mean, so I have just general thoughts. I think that once they respond to Commissioner Shetta, it's probably going to kind of change the big picture, and so therefore I do want to reserve the right to really comment
Yes, absolutely.
later. Still in all, by what I've been given now, I'm not convinced that parking adds anything except for the fact that it allows for valuable relocation of floor area to the most expensive apartment. But in terms of their argument that it actually beefs up the apartment prices, according to the financials, it does nothing of the sort. So basically, the residential comparables, my argument before was that they weren't adjusted at all. They went through the same comparables and they made adjustments to them. What's interesting is a good many of those comparables have absolutely no parking, and yet you don't see that their sales prices are impacted in any way for that. Not only that, if that argument was being made and they did adjust the comparables based on the fact that there's parking, overall, there would be increases in every price category in the sales prices, and there are not. Some of them go up based on the new adjustments, but some of them go down. So 1-bedrooms go up in price from the original report, but 2-bedrooms go down in price. 3-bedrooms go down in price, 4-bedrooms go up in price. And so it really isn't indicating that parking is having an impact on the sales price. The statement that the lack of amenities is what's creating price adjustments downward overall based on the comparables. Well, if you're adding the recreation room, at least in that scenario, you would see a budge upwards. But when you look at the pricing plans for that scenario and the other scenarios, there is no budging upwards in price. In fact, in many cases, the price per square foot goes down on each floor, which means that nobody was considering whether or not that recreation room was adding to value. And so all it was doing is just a placeholder. It's not adding to value. It could even be a studio apartment. I know one would say, why would you want a studio here? But it's 662 square feet. At least sell it. If you're not going to have it somehow affecting the value indirectly, well, then just sell the space as some kind of an apartment, or make the apartment that's there, the 1-bedroom, larger.
Right, which we see a really nice version of a sort of nice version in the proposed, because it's got a crazy living room. And in the as of right, a great version. I mean, actually, those are much better layouts.
Right, so that's why my statement was, and then when we look at the parking comparables that they used to price it, we had said that we thought that they were using some prices that actually were dragging down the overall sales price per se, because we saw in that area on other cases, even cases several years ago, that the sales price per space was around $500,000.
Right.
So they're still keeping most of the comparables that they used. However, the lower price comparables are either in 2013, which is way old, or they're not even in the same area. They're in West Chelsea, and we're not really sure what that whole parking situation is in terms of demand and supply. So it really can't inform what's going on here. And I think that those lower prices are dragging the overall price down to $367,000. So they're not even putting it at the $500,000 that we pretty much think it should be. So rather than going back and forth, that's why I'm saying, we've had cases before where applicants have wanted to put parking in, but parking ends up really driving the whole application. And we've said parking is not required, take the parking out.
Right.
Parking is not required here, just let's take the parking out and let's move on from there.
I agree. We needed you to say that.
Okay. Also, and then I had one other, they addressed my issue of adjusting all the comparables, be it site value comparables or rental comparables. And they addressed my issue about valuing all of the outdoor space instead of just the first 15% of outdoor space. So now they're valuing it in a stepped formula. So it's like up to 300 square feet, it's 40% of indoor space, and then 15% indoor space for the additional square feet. So it's more or less like 30% of indoor space. And we've seen that, so I'm going to accept it. All of the returns, when you go to the pro forma, are divided by 3 years to give us an annual return. And I just want them to justify the 3-year construction timeline to sell out, to support that.
Yeah.
Because it is a small building. I think the World Trade Center some buildings were built in 3 years.
Yes.
So, I mean, they should just justify it.
Yeah, Chair, please. I dropped three points, very quick. The first one is construction cost estimate, the comparison of the typical to the actual. As per the structural engineer, he said that for the typical site, they would need mat foundation 2.5 feet thick. The way McLaughlin considered this in their construction cost estimate is they just consider regular spread footings. So the concrete quantity in the typical table is just less than 100 cubic yard for the typical. Of course, they compare this tiny cost for that tiny foundation system to the huge cost for the caisson piles. Per the structural engineer, it should have been 30-inch thick mat foundation. The concrete amount for this is $375, about 4 times the spread foundation. And this just adds up $275,000 to the cost difference. This is one thing. The second thing is the TA approved excavation support drawings. My understanding is that they applied to the TA and they got approval for the SOE. I understand that it's soldier pile lagging system. If they applied to the TA, if they got approval from the TA, I need to get a copy, and I did ask for this last hearing, of the excavation support drawings. Third and final, on the Franklin project, I don't recall the name, 100 Franklin, I guess.
Yeah.
My understanding is that RA and Selman was the geotech and the structural for that project. I would benefit from their experience on this very similar project just across the street. If they can provide us with what kind of foundation system they ended up using there, that would be helpful. What kind of isolation system, vibration isolation system they ended up using there, that would be helpful. What kind of dewatering, just get us as much information as you can on Franklin so we can benefit from a site that's less than 20 feet away or looking at the subject site. So,
Good idea. Okay, thank you. All right, any other comments on this? Thanks. Move on.
Item number 30, 2017-304BZ, 160 17th Street, Brooklyn.
Microphone. This is 2017-304BZ, right? Because
Yeah.
it's not in the right order for me. Okay,
160 17th Street,
yeah.
Brooklyn Prospect Charter School.
Okay, so noise from the third floor roof deck was the main open issue, which has now been addressed with noise studies and discussions with DEP. And the result of that is that they will set back by 2 feet from the property line, the accessible roof deck. So they'll put some sort of a barrier rail so that nobody can move past that point. Apparently, according to studies, this distance will mitigate sound transmission to acceptable levels, and the plans have been revised to reflect that setback. No further submissions were made on trying to reconfigure the 3 egress corridors. I don't think this is still open, right?
Yes.
So I would like to hear whether that was pursued, since that's my ongoing mantra, that the entry conditions remain extremely tight here, and if it's possible to make a fire corridor that goes in the cellar and comes up at the entrance, that would open up the lobby. Maybe they tried it and they couldn't figure out how to make it work, or maybe they didn't look at it. So they just didn't comment at all on that request. And those are my comments. Anybody else?
We got DOT sign off as well.
Okay.
Item number 31, 2018-62BZ, 7377 Sand Street, Brooklyn. We also received a submission this morning.
Right, so I didn't have a chance to look at the submission, so if anybody else did.
So they provided the redacted lease rider. In that specifically, it talks about the staircase B, and that the staircase B would be dedicated as a primary means of access for the school, and that the loading dock, would be restricted from being used during the hours of 7:45 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. and 3:45 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Mondays to Fridays. I don't have the additional language. There was additional language that if the school is open on days other than Mondays and Fridays, I think similar will apply. So,
What was the afternoon hour?
3:45 to 4:30 p.m. And they also provide description of the stairwell security measures, also provided a revised school operations flow plan showing where the entrance and that the freight elevator will be controlled by access card, and access to the school floor by the freight elevator will be limited to only designated staff with key access. Did I miss anything, Veronica?
I don't know, so,
And the revised statement of findings and other things. Did I miss anything, Commissioner Otley Brown? You also reviewed it.
No, I think they were very responsive
Yes.
to what we had asked.
Yes.
okay. Okay, I'm just looking to see what our other comments were, if the main one was about this access point. And so the
relationship to the loading, so they.
Yeah, and that was a signed lease rider from the landlord? Yeah. Okay. Signed, okay. Great.
New cases, item number 1, 2017-207BZ, 2030 Broadway, Manhattan, this is PCE, Core Power Yoga.
What? That's the first one?
Yeah,
Yes.
all the PCEs now are first item.
First,
Yeah,
oh.
in the first.
That's 32.
So the 203
Oh,
is on
okay.
Broadway.
Yeah, so I got that, okay. All right, so this is a legalization, it opened in May. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval, we have 1 letter in support, we have DOI sign-off. They should verify that none of this PCE is in the R8B district. The statement of fact says that it's the case, but I didn't see the zoning district boundary line on the floor plans that contain the PCE, because it is on the site plan, but you don't really know where the PCE is on the site plan. And also, I didn't find the disabled access to the PCE, and we need the,
It's by the common set of
Elevators?
elevators, the residential elevator.
okay, so how does that work exactly? It's a residential building, and people can go into the residential lobby to get to the PCE?
It's a
That's-
good question in terms of operation, how that is
Yeah,
going to be
because a lot of residential buildings don't want folks from the street coming in, because anyone can go to the PCE, right? So they need to talk about that more. This is a historic building, so we need the certificate of no effect from LPC.
I think they
It was
have.
included in
They have
the
it.
I didn't find it, okay. So that's in the folder?
Yeah.
I didn't find that. Really? Sure.
I will double check. And
I know that they
Saw
said
it.
that they would get one. I didn't see one.
I saw it and I have.
I believe I saw it,
noticed
yeah.
it.
They
You
got a
did?
letter from the landmark saying it is okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Fire safety in the building?
They, didn't I write here?
We don't.
Entrances, oh, what about fire safety? Oh, it's because, oh, okay. Yeah, fire department should comment, but it's because it's on the second floor, not in the cellar of a 12-story mixed-use building. So that was where I personally was less concerned because it's not in the cellar, but yeah, fire department should comment.
Yeah, they have a certificate from the landmark.
Oh, you did? You found that? Okay.
Yeah, it's in the folder. Yeah.
Okay,
Any other comments?
no.
Item number 2, 2018, 37BZ, 560 West 33rd Street, Manhattan. This is a physical culture establishment for Equinox Hotel Spa.
Right, okay. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. We have DOI sign off. The building's not built yet, so it's a 72-story building in Hudson Yards. And this spa is adjacent to the gym that we looked at last week. That one we had questions about because it has an outdoor area. This is all in the interior, so.
The outdoor swimming pool, that's the one.
Yeah, that's adjacent to the one with the outdoor swimming pool, but this is the indoor spa. Any comment? Okay.
Item number 3, 2018, 50BZ, 45 West 45th Street, Manhattan. This is an Orange Theory Fitness PCE.
Kind of. So we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board waived its recommendation. I said kind of because the DOI sign-off is for 2018-50-BZ EPOC, EPOC Fitness and Tech, Valentin Iliescu. The storefront, the statement of fact states that this is for Orange Theory. If Orange Theory is operating as a DBA, then DOI had to have been informed of that. So, because DOI often gives us Orange Theory DOI letters, right? And in this case, they didn't. It's direct to EPOC Theory, EPOC Fitness and Tech. I don't believe the gym is open yet, and the drawings indicate there will be sprinklers and fire alarms. So we need to get the DOI cleared up on it. Okay?
Item number 4, 2017, 47BZ, 1052 East 22nd Street, Brooklyn.
Sorry, hold on a second, because everything's out of order.
2017, 47BZ.
2017-47.
47.
Okay, got it. Okay. All right, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. As a threshold matter, there are no calculations to show that 50% of the existing exterior walls will be maintained on the exterior, or that 50% of the existing floor joists will be maintained. My rough calculations indicate that the rear wall, which is already non-compliant at the first and second floors, needs to be maintained in order to achieve the 50%. This means, the means and methods diagram that was provided, while helpful conceptually, doesn't include the lifting of the existing joists in order to increase the ceiling heights. There are 3 other houses on the tax block and social block with 1 OFAR, but so obviously this proposal is large for the typical with only 3 of those houses. The rear yard here is already non-complying at 19 foot 5 at the first floor and 23 feet at the second. I don't think it should increase its imposition on the neighbors who have complying or partially complying rear yards, and in doing that, it would solve the retention of existing material problem, probably. There was a front yard study done that shows front yards are erratic in depth and range from shallow 8 feet to deep 29 feet. The adjacent houses have 13 feet and 23-foot front yards, so it's a big range. The proposal here is to reduce the front yard to 15 feet. The house is approximately 3 foot taller than its immediate neighbors, and the front yard study that includes heights doesn't have consistent measurements for those houses. It's either 33.8 or 34 or 32.3 versus 32. But according to that same study, there are many houses further down the street that are 35 feet and taller. They should bring the architect so we can talk about the retention of existing material issue. Yeah, okay.
They're missing survey. I don't think they provided survey. Oh, no, I stand corrected.
Yeah,
The submission that was made on June 11th includes it. I didn't see it in the original one.
Okay.
I stand corrected.
Move on? Item number 5, 2017-266BZ, 2303 Avenue K, Brooklyn. This is a single-family home enlargement.
We have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. Again, as a threshold question, 50% of the existing exterior walls need to be retained at the exterior, and 50% of floor joists have to be retained. Demonstrate how this is being achieved. I do want to make a general comment about this issue. This applicant's representative does many of these 73-622s and knows about this requirement, and I don't understand why we continue to get applications that don't respond to this. Even if the application was submitted initially a while ago, and I note that this one was submitted in September of 2017 and didn't respond to the notice of comments until July of 2018, even though 2 sets of comments were sent out, one in October of last year and one in August of this year, but they didn't respond to the August question. So I don't understand why in submitting the response only a month ago, not even, they haven't addressed this issue in advance, because what it does is it makes it difficult at the hearings, and it misleads the owner, frankly, and the architect into believing that they have a viable project that doesn't retain enough existing material. And I just think I have a big problem with this sort of method of doing business. So, in addition, the FAR request is too high at 1.06. They need to bring it down to 1. The open space ratio study shows that too much of the lot is proposed to be covered compared to most of the neighbors. So retaining more existing exterior walls will correct that. Drawings should use dimensions consistently, so either in decimals or in feet and inches, not both. So they're switching back and forth on the same drawing. And then the architect has to attend. Any other comment?
I agree with you. I think on this project, I do feel that there is a lot more FAR that's being pushed into this site, and given that it's a corner lot, it is going to have a much stronger presence on both frontages. So I do think the FAR needs to be brought down, which can be done by retaining some of the existing structure and push some of the proposed floor area that is extending out from the exterior back in, and I think that can shape it.
Item number 6, 2018-1BZ, 11-02 37th Avenue, Queens. This is parking reduction.
Right. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends denial with 33 to deny and 2 to approve. Their resolution, I thought, provided a very careful analysis of the situation, which I found useful in guiding my understanding of the project and the area. The applicant should respond to each of the Community Board's points. There are many, I can read them. Can I read them into the record? It says the proposed building provides a very generous workspace employee ratio. The applicant should reconsider the design of the cellar, first, and mezzanine levels to accommodate a larger number of parking spaces closer to the number required by zoning. Options might include increasing the height of the first floor for taller lifts, reducing the floor plane of the mezzanine to accommodate more lifts, waterproofing the cellar during initial construction instead of not waiting until a future flood, and using it for supplemental parking. I'll explain that after. Relocating some of the mechanicals and cellar uses to other building areas. Office workers at the site have limited mass transit options. The F line is 0.4 miles away, which I counted as about 7 blocks, and the N and W train's 0.9 miles away, which is about 11 blocks. So most are likely to drive to work. This is still the Community Board's comments. The parking demand numbers submitted by the applicant focus on a single user for the building and are based on current employment of 54 workers with 35 students per class. The analysis should include future growth of the Black Car Fund, considering the increasing number of drivers employed by Lyft, Uber, and other car services. Unless you read the news, but, you know. The analysis does not consider the potential for subdividing the building floors and renting office space to other use group 6B uses that will generate an increase in parking demand just for employees. The parking study does not include in its analysis the number of clients/drivers who arrive at the site by car to use the company's insurance services, or the number of visitors and vendors who come to the site for meetings. Most clients, that's drivers and students, will likely arrive at the building by car throughout the day, before, after, and in between shifts, and not in the morning at the start of business. The number of reservoir and ADA parking spaces are limited. I think there are 4 reservoir and 1 ADA. The potential queuing on local streets will impede traffic movement and flow on already congested streets leading to the Queensboro Bridge. The potential disadvantages to the neighborhood outweigh the advantages of the proposed development with reduced parking. Anecdotal information about on-street parking capacity and availability from area residents and workers is at odds with the parking study. That's the end of the Community Board's comments. Then back to mine, we have 15 letters of objection citing inadequate parking currently and congestion. There's an error, I note, in the stated zoning square feet in the statement of facts. There's a chart and there's a text, and they don't agree. I'm trying to understand the approach to the design of the building. The statement of fact states that although the building is not within a flood zone, and this is what the Community Board was getting at, it's not within a flood zone and is adjacent to a Zone X area, which doesn't therefore have a designated base flood elevation, right? It will nevertheless be built without a full cellar to comply with Appendix G, even though all of the utilities, despite what they say, are in the partial cellar, and the sections make no reference to NAVD 88 or the base flood elevation of the nearest FEMA-rated zone. Plus, there is some floor area to spare if you had to for additional parking levels. So I wonder, what about 4 levels of stackers, which I see actually the actual manufacturer that they're proposing to use, Park Plus, manufacturers. So they, which shows that depending on how many SUV levels you have, they are either 26'7" or 32'7" to the top clear. That would mean they'd be higher than the top level would be higher than 23 feet, which would count towards floor area, but they have floor area to spare. And that would get you much closer to the requirement, which my calculations show 73 spaces you get to, and allow for more reservoir spaces at the bottom row of stackers. We've seen that in some other applications where they actually keep the bottom stackers free for reservoir, and at the moment, they only have 4 reservoir spaces. The drawings don't show the rated occupancies for the office use, which I believe is 100 square feet per person for business use, according to Building Code Table 1004.1.1. I agree with the community board that we can't rely on the stated occupancy rate of only, what I understand is 80 employees or 73 employees, depending on which document you read. Since businesses change, move, et cetera, like for instance, what if the current owner needs to rent out some of the space to another business or increase the number of employees? The parking study should be modified accordingly to reflect the occupancy rates, rated occupancy levels. If there are so many available spaces during the peak periods, according to their study, then why is the perception of area residents that there is no availability? I'd really like them to explain that, because, for instance, neighbors might be concerned about how they can't find parking when they get home, but that would be reflected in the Saturday parking rates, right? So Saturday morning, there shouldn't be any parking really either. And the study shows that there is more parking on Saturday morning when there would be classes. So I'm trying to understand why the perception is that there's no parking. And then, as I said, subway stations are far, actually 12 blocks and 7 blocks away. I know there was a survey of existing employees indicating how they would come to work at this new location. But first, and we've talked about this in other cases, you can't assume the same employees or that there wouldn't be changes in their habits, like it's too far to walk, I'm driving from now on. And so the survey should be checked with modal splits that are based on census tract and reverse journey to work data. All the data that is compiled from surveys should be checked against the standard methodologies. And I'm curious where the students were polled and indicated that 94% of those students go to class by car, the assumption for employees was only a 45% utilization. Like, why are the employees so different than the students in terms of parking, or in terms of auto use? I also would like to see the calculations to support the accumulations, and sometimes it's because I'm not doing the math myself, so in this case, if 95% of the 32 wellness students drive, why is there an accumulation of only 25 cars? And maybe it's because they're figuring in how many people drive together, and that kind of thing, but I want to see the calculations to understand that. Like, why is there an assumption that people who come to a class will drive together as opposed to an employee, where I get that, you live nearby, you come to work every day, some days I drive, some days you drive, but I don't understand where somebody who attends one class would pool with somebody else. I mean, that seems like a lot of work for just one day's class. And why are 73 total employees used in the tables when elsewhere in the documents we hear that there are 80 employees? So there's a disconnect there. We have DEP sign off on air quality, but they require a phase 2 as of June 18th, and requested assessment of whether noise attenuation will be required. I didn't see any further submissions from the applicant. And this is in a waterfront revitalization area, which may account for why they're looking at this as if it were in a flood zone, but it's not in flood zone. And we did get an interesting chart that I've actually never seen before that looks at the sort of comparison between the flood zone areas and how you look at a waterfront revitalization area and estimates of the 2030 flood and the 2050 flood, but I don't know whether that's actually relevant to what we're looking at, because it's today's flood FEMA regulations. City planning signed off on waterfront revitalization, and LPC signed off on archaeology and architectural significance.
We actually did get a sign off for air quality and noise.
Oh, okay.
And they're reviewing, DEP's reviewing the work plan in right now for hazmat.
Okay. So the assessment on noise was approved, okay. Okay.
I have some comments on it. First of all, maybe I misread it, but the statement of facts states that the drivers do not visit would not visit the facility in person. Classes are attended elsewhere, and communication would be by email, telephone, mail. If that is the case, then that conflicts with the programmatic need analysis that was presented, where it is projected that 50 people will be attending for the wellness on Wednesday and safety classes on Saturdays. So I just would like a clarification on that. The programmatic need does not provide clarity with regards to office use, as you mentioned, in comparison to the operation of the current two locations, because they do have two locations and one is on Crescent Street. So I would like to know what's happening on the Crescent Street. Are they planning to relocate from the Crescent Street to this side? And will they be operating in tandem, which is within walking distance? So need to understand the office use operation relationship to these two existing operations. Also, I was curious as to why a generator is being proposed for this site.
Why, I'm sorry?
A generator, that goes to the flood issue.
Waterfront revitalization.
Yeah,
The waterfront revitalization.
right.
The community board had raised a question about raising the floor-to-ceiling height of the first floor to accommodate it. I looked at the plan. The problem is it's already the proposed height is at 22 feet. So,
Right.
The maximum permitted is up to 23. So one doesn't get anything. So you do have to lower it down to allow for a taller
Right.
stacker.
But that's what the comment that
That's
I
fine.
had.
No, I agree
that
with you.
They
Go ahead.
have floor area to spare, so they could afford to raise the ceiling, and the top stackers might count towards floor area. Because that's an interesting question. Didn't we have recently we had a determination by DOB about that rooftop parking.
Right.
Where DOB determined that it still counts as being below 23 feet, even though the top of the car is
Higher than-
significantly
right.
higher
it's the
than
one on
23
McDonald.
feet. Yeah.
Right.
So it was, the top of the car was at 30, and DOB was okay as long as whatever.
But that was
right.
an open rooftop. This
Sure.
is enclosed.
No, but
That-
the rule is the 23 feet, right, I understand what you're saying, so that the floor height is
I
higher than
think
23
in this-
feet. So, right, so it might count at the top as floor area,
Above
but
the height of 23 feet.
not below that, so that's.
That's something to look at.
Yeah.
And I was curious to know if the existing building does it have?
It does not have
full
parking.
cellar? No,
Oh, a full cellar.
Full cellar.
Full cellar. I just want to know that, because if it does, then, there's not much additional digging this building would have to do. You're using almost the existing cellar space, if it's fully built to the building footprint.
Oh, the existing building on the site?
Yes.
Okay.
So that can also take care of some of the cost factors if that's an issue, though that's not before us, but I'm just kind of curious.
Right. My understanding was they're trying to not to have only a partial cellar so that they avoid the flood issues. But what makes no sense is their partial cellar has all the mechanicals and the electrical.
Except for the generator.
Yeah, except for the generator. And they have an electrical room on an upper floor. And I'm not sure if that's like setting it aside and to not count as floor area, by the way, so they call it a mechanical. They already have the electrical room in the cellar, so that's double electrical.
With regards to the traffic analysis, why only on the middays? It was interesting that only on the middays, the employee modal split shows that 83% walk, whereas rest of the time, 0% is walking. Whether that's those who are attending the wellness and the safety classes or the employee. And also they need to provide the maps. So the EAS map does not show the on-street parking regulations. So it's also not clear how the parking regulation would apply, especially on like Wednesdays and Saturdays.
They did have a map of parking regulations, with little dots. These are very hard to follow, but anyway.
maybe
It's
I
a
just-
map with dots indicating parking regulations, but what's always hard to follow is, what's the extent?
That's really what
It's just
I mean.
a dot.
Yeah, I want to know how far
Yeah.
of that street frontage does it apply? This particular block, I was there specifically on Saturday, because Saturday you are going to get, 50-plus people. I was just curious, I've been down this road many times, so I was more curious on a weekend. In terms of how this neighborhood operates, to the north of to the north of 37th Avenue, there is a much more concentration of residential uses. To the south of it, it is the more hardcore industrial uses. You can find on-street parking in that industrial area on weekends, but not so on the residential section. And I would think that would hold true even for a weekday when you are going to find less amount of on-street parking even on the industrial area because there are more employees parking there. So that leads to the issue of why the community feels that there is lack of parking, and I think there's justification to that. And I also was curious if the Crescent Street site was used to determine the parking demand and the travel mode for employees.
Oh, where did they do the poll, in other words?
Yeah. Because Wall Street is irrelevant.
Right, good. Yes. Any other comments about this? No?
Good. This concludes the Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for August 20th, 2018.
Tony, can